Just give me a okay. All right. Try this now. Let me know if I'm coming through. I don't know why I have so much trouble trying to get these going. Okay. Yeah, I think my microphone reset. So sorry about that. Again, this is totally unplanned, impromptu. And of course, when I saw the news earlier today that William Friedkin had passed away, it did hit me quite hard, as I think it did for pretty much all cinephiles, no matter what your favorite freaking film is, it's definitely one of the big names, and it made all of us collectively as cinephiles just have that moment of heaviness earlier today. So I wanted to put something together, and then I was like, you know what, I've got so many random thoughts and things. I figured I'd just go into the live stream realm and just have a chat with you guys. So again, this is totally no frills as my streams usually are, so I don't have anything planned. It's just sort of reeling, and I did. Unfortunately, I kind of wondered when the French Connection scenario happened with the streaming edit, and we didn't hear anything from Friedkin or any representatives or any sort of official statement. I was kind of wondering, is he, maybe not doing so hot, because he's, was getting on up there in years, so it's understandable, and you would think of all people, as he was nicknamed and had a whole book written about him, Hurricane Billy of all people would definitely have something to say about that. So it and of course, when people get to a certain age, you unfortunately start to kind of expect sad news like this. So it was at least not something completely out of the blue, but in another sense, it kind of was, because he was just at the TCM festival, and he would still do interviews, and he was always very great about doing interviews and being exceptionally candid and things, as William Friedkin was going to be. Like, he was never going to sugarcoat anything, which is why we all love him. Although that would make him not necessarily the easiest person to work with, and so you can understand why some people chose not to do so again. So, oh, cool. Got some people floating in. So, welcome in everybody. Again, this is just totally unplanned, and so I'm just gonna kind of talk about a little bit of my history with Freakin's films and how I first came to him, and just a general loose chat. I've always kind of felt that yes, he's one of the bigger 70s names in terms of the school of directors that suddenly exploded in the new Hollywood, but he's definitely, I think, one of the most underrated, and it didn't help that he had kind of burned some bridges, and also with the sort of implosion of the new Hollywood by the end of the 70s, you had each of the directors having their big sort of massive budget film that flopped at the box office, and then they had to have the sort of comeback picture. They had to be accepted by the new 80s conglomerate Hollywood, and Freakin never really got there, and that, I think, plus his always outsider maverick status, and the stories of his ego, and the stories that would get around the industry, it didn't he didn't have as easy of a hill to climb to get out of that hole of the big budget auteur flop of the late 70s, whereas Scorsese was able to overcome New York. Spielberg, most of all, was able to overcome 1941. But everybody had theirs, but some were kind of left to their own devices. So it's one of the many reasons why I always thought it was interesting that, at least from my perspective, Friedkin has a lot of similarities with Bogdanovich in a way, and of course, they were part of the director's company for a very short window of time with Coppola. But if you look at it, they're sort of two sides of the same coin in a way. They both had such a deep love of classic filmmaking and classic Hollywood and the studio system, but they also were kind of outsiders, and they never were the big box office titans that others in their orbit became. And after the sort of end of the new Hollywood period in the 80s, and for the rest of their careers, they both had to sort of struggle in how they would keep making films. And while they were polar opposites in their approaches, I've always thought that was interesting that they had a lot of similarities in both their career and how they were viewed. So I thought it was fitting that they were part of the director's company, but also they had completely different opinions. And Friedkin wound up not even making a film, and he didn't want them to make Daisy Miller because he thought it was a bad idea. And when you looked at the box office results of Daisy Miller, you kind of thought, well, maybe he was right, but he also didn't like the conversation either. So that's the thing. He could throw out his opinions, and even if you vehemently disagree with them, you could still understand where he was coming from. And that's another thing I always appreciated about him, always speaking his mind. And when he would talk about Hitchcock and say that he thought Vertigo was not good, and it's like, I can't just I respect your opinion, but also I don't. And he didn't like Lawrence of Arabia at all, and it's like, I can actually see that, because you don't see William Friedkin getting on board with a sweeping roadshow epic. Him making a 3-hour film that was a big roadshow film with a slower pace, would probably be like anathema to Friedkin's soul, because he had to have focus and drive. And I've always felt his real signifier is in his style. There's this kind of feeling of a kinetic energy, is the best way I can describe it. I've always felt he was a very kinetic director. All of his films have a sense of movement, even if they're not always rapidly cutting. There's also a palpable energy there, which of course you get throughout The Exorcist and many other films, that where the energy level is visceral. There's a visceral quality to all his films, and that's why they have such a way to burn themselves into your brain, and you remember them so vividly. The actual experience of watching it, in addition to the plot and the narrative and the story and the characters, you remember the experience of actually sitting through the film, whether you liked it or not, or you thought it might have issues, or you prefer some rather than others. All the films he made, you can't say that none of them are cookie cutter. None of them were made by an assembly line. Even when they would get taken away and recut, or he didn't get to put his director's cut out there, and they were compromised in some way, or it was a sort of project for hire, there are still moments throughout. There's still his stamp on there. They still have a particular flavor to them that are not part of the typical assembly line. So his filmography is really fascinating to study, even in the later films, and again, things he would do for hire. But he had to follow the same sort of pathway that all the big name directors did in the 60s and 70s, once the sort of new Hollywood period, as it's called now, had kind of ended. And he took a number of interesting sort of diverging paths, and some more successful than others, depending on the actual film getting completed as desired. But I think his is such an incredibly important career to study, because he never did give up, and he did keep plugging away at trying to get films made. And he has a number of really interesting films. I thought Killer Joe was actually rather good. I was so happy that he came out swinging with something. And he actually does have another film that he did complete, and we will see posthumously. He did this remake of the Kane Mutiny, which sounds fascinating, and I'm very curious to see what he did with it. I'm really excited to see that. I'm very curious to see how that plays out, and what he did with attacking that particular story again with a different cast in 2023. So he never stopped, and his book, The Friedkin Connection, is a must read. If you haven't read it, I read it back when it came out, and I've been meaning to get a copy. I think I read it in the library, but so that's why I don't have it. I don't have one. I have a copy behind me. One of my many oversights. But he was of course very candid in there. And I have read the other main book, which was done back in the '80s, literally called Hurricane Billy. So if you want more of the sort of anecdotes about the experience of working with Friedkin back in the day, that's a must read, and also kind of gives you an idea of how other people viewed him. And he did seem to, I guess you could say that maybe he mellowed a little bit with age here and there in some ways, and wasn't quite as completely in your face brash as he was when he started out. But I've also kind of always felt that some of that was, at least to some extent, maybe just a little bit of a performance, and maybe at some points he would get caught up in that a little bit. I think a lot of that was just his personality, but it's not always how the actual person is. And so I think at some points that may have gotten a little overblown here and there. But then there you read other stories or hear other interviews about people who worked with Freakin', and then you're just like, oh yeah, I can buy that. Okay. So let's see. Got some comments over here. Uh Welcome in, everybody. Jason says, I once wrote a review of Sorcerer that Freakin' somehow read and tweeted about, a highlight of my life. Yes. And it was amazing that he was active on social media. That was just not everyone of his generation certainly embraces modern technology. And even though I do have some definite issues with the way that he liked to go in and play around with some of his films on home video, he did embrace home video. He did embrace physical media and actually recorded many audio commentaries and participated in the mastering process for all of his films when they would get releases. And that's again not something that everybody does. Most just don't want to bother with it, or they don't think it's important. And at least he did. He did view that as important. Again, I do have quite a few issues with some of the choices and tweaks he made, but I do, of course, wholeheartedly appreciate that he did understand the importance of preserving the work. And I think that also it goes hand in hand with his reverence for classic cinema. And he would also even wind up doing commentaries for other classic films, which is, again, not something famous directors would actually do, is actually sit down and talk about somebody else's film, and actually show that they cared and that they're simply fans of other great cinema, and even acknowledge that their own work is merely following in the footsteps of those who came before. So those are some of the many reasons why I always admired him, and can always listen to any interview or just listen to him talk about films until the proverbial cows come home, and then some. So he's always been a fascinating character. For me, my entry point was, it seems to be one of two films for most people. It's either The Exorcist or The French Connection, and for me it was The French Connection. And either one, when you see it, you're like, you have to know how this was made. You have to know who made it. You have to know who Freakin' was. You have to go and find this stuff out. And of course, having physical media releases that actually did have extras certainly helped. But that's your sort of hook point. That's what hooks you in, and then you just have to go and find out what else he did, and what is he doing now, and who was the brain behind this. Because yes, these films were released by studios, but they are not studio films in their DNA, and they are part of the core of launching American films forward in the early to mid 1970s. And had Friedkin been able to get more of that career longevity and big releases and sort of reinvent himself in the 80s like Scorsese and Spielberg did, he would be a bigger household name than he is. And it hasn't helped that some of his other films have sort of been kicked around, and of course Sorcerer was sort of out of print for a long time and stuck in really crappy versions, but now it's had a sort of at least a little bit of a renaissance since the new master and the Blu-ray came out a number of years ago. So it's good that people are finally at least getting a bit beyond the oh, it's the guy who made The Exorcist, because that's what all the articles always lead with, and with good reason. But it always kind of bugs me a little bit because it's like, he did other films, It's like, have you not seen The French Connection? And I think because The Exorcist is such an iconic horror film and was so massively successful upon the original release and ever since then, it has kind of overshadowed most of his other films. And I think it's easier for people today to understand the impact of The Exorcist than it is the impact of The French Connection, because The French Connection has so deeply worked its way into every cop film, story, television show, and everything, attempting a sense of gritty realism, that it doesn't feel as fresh as it did if you don't have the historical context of knowing what passed for gritty and realistic New York film before The French Connection in 1971. So that's why when I first saw it, I even as a kid I could recognize that this was something different, and that there's just such a palpable energy and such a you are there perspective that you literally felt as if you were standing on the grungy street corner, freezing to death, standing next to Popeye Doyle, watching the Frenchman eat this beautiful multi-course lunch, and just having to watch through the window, and then Popeye starts munching this old donut and just trying to survive on a steaming cup of probably not very good coffee, and you just feel the freezing factor and the misery of that scene because it's so lived in and so visceral. And it's that visceral quality that makes The Exorcist so ridiculously powerful, and that's why neither film has dated at all. And that was Friedkin's real ability, and the signifier that makes his style so unique. And so that's the element you can recognize even in some of the later films where he didn't have full control, and you at least get it in flourishes. So just to catch up with these. Oh, cool. Got some people watching French Connection. Only seen the extended version of The Exorcist. Yeah, that's one of the big ones that you can't see the original theatrical cut of The Exorcist with the mono mix, and that's actually why I don't have a physical copy. There are unfortunately a number of freaking films that I've never gotten a physical copy of because there's not a real original version or a really good version. I've chipped away at a few here and there over the years, but I've always hoped that The Exorcist could get a real archival release. And Freakin also liked to go in and play around with the color timing. Of course, the big one is the first Blu-ray of The French Connection, where he basically did a whole experimental version of it, which it was an interesting idea, but it shouldn't have supplanted the original. And thankfully, Fox made the signature disc with the non-experimental cinematographer supervised version. I wouldn't have minded had they been presented in the same release, separately, and you could look at the director's new experimental version should you wish to. I think that's how that should have been done. But at least he was still invested and involved with his earlier work. It's just that archival preservation and having a real 100% theatrically accurate record was not necessarily his main goal. So admittedly, you do have to look at all of his films on the more modern transfers and double check the color timing and pay attention to the sound mixes, because he liked to remix soundtracks and tweak things a little bit or push the color timing here and there. You've even got that on the Sorcerer Blu-ray and some versions of To Live and Die in LA. And the French Connection didn't have its mono mix for most of its home video history. So and Cruising is probably the biggest example, because Arrow finally got to do their Blu-ray, and we thought, oh, we're finally going to get the original theatrical version, in a nice new scan without Friedkin's color timing and sound remixing. But he nixed that and wanted his new take on it as their release, and they were obliged to do so. And again, I get it, but I think somebody should have just said, hey, we should just have two discs here, and so that way, you still preserve the original as it was. So I don't know if now moving forward, we might see some more deluxe releases that might do that and have the Friedkin newer master that he preferred presented alongside the original theatrical version. I hope that happens, because I do think a lot of his films really do need help on home video. There's a lot that are stuck and not very good transfers and some pretty crummy masters in certain instances. And then there's some where you can't even see the proper version. Like we can't get the director's cut of Jade in widescreen in an HD master, and that should happen. It shouldn't be stuck on a VHS tape, or I think it's also on streaming now in a couple places, but also basically just the old standard F master. And we didn't even get that in the theatrical cut in widescreen for a long while. But there's a lot of his films that need better treatment on video, and then there's also a lot that need to, if you're going to have the newer Freakin' Master, you should also have the theatrical version. And The Exorcist also is at Warner, and they've done all the recuts and versions you've never seen, and da 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 da. So hopefully at some point they decide to just make a whole kit and caboodle version, with a new 4K master, properly graded, and so that way you can have every cut and the theatrical version properly timed with no changes, and the original mono mix. But asking for Warner to do an archival release is, I know, asking for a bit much, but it is The Exorcist, so it's not like they're not going to make their money back. Let's see. Oh, cool. My pleasure to talk about Freakin'. One of my students reminded me of my fierce devotion to cruising, uncompromising, and fearless master. Yeah. Um, I'm kind of torn on Cruising, actually. It was not the easiest film to see for a long time, and then when the DVD finally came out, it was his newer version, and then Arrow's Blu-ray basically is like I guess technically a slight upgrade on that. So when you see it, you can tell the color is a bit modernized and that the sound has been remixed, but I have to say, even when he was doing that stuff, it's not like he was trying to change the meaning of the film. I think he was always trying to enhance what his original goal was. And then, of course, you had limitations at the time, and he would talk about how he would always run into roadblocks and getting prints made, and there were always limitations, and it depended on the lab, and there were limitations in what Matrix Stereo could do at the time. So you never get the sense that he's actively fighting against his original intent. He was always seemingly trying to just make it better, to do things that he may have originally wanted to do, which I understand. With Cruising, though, it's a film where the atmosphere is incredible, and the sense of palpable tension is off the charts, particularly in all of the sequences with the serial killer who remains unseen. It's I mean, it is hair-raising amounts of tension, and what should be very simple, but it is quite terrifying in those moments, and of course befitting of the director of The Exorcist. But for me, it's a film that I can admire things in it. I've never been the biggest fan of its actual screenplay, and I think I think it just needed at least a stronger sense of story. So it's a film I admire more for its atmosphere and actually getting made, because it was an incredibly difficult production, especially since a lot of people at the time were convinced that it had the wrong intentions, and so they picketed while the film was being shot and interfered with the shooting. So it was not an easy film to make, and that definitely shows. And You want to talk about having guts? Well, imagine being the person making Cruising back in 1980 and actually pulling it off and getting it into theaters. I mean, that certainly took some doing. But I think he was that Friedkin in that film was sort of playing with some additional concepts. So it is a film that is a bit puzzle like, and there are some dreamlike or surreal elements, and it builds to the climax and the ending that does leave a lot of questions in the audience's mind. It's one of those films where you can take it a number of different ways, and that does not only add replay value, but it's a film you have to sort of chew over. You have to think about it afterwards. And pretty much all Friedkin's films that he had full control over were like that. And so in some ways, I think it kind of sets the stage for some of the same elements that we'd see pop up in To Live and Die in LA. But it's just one of those films that I've always admired more for its elements. I just wish that I liked the actual script more, but that's just how I take it. I still find it a fascinating film to think about and sort of mull over, particularly the sort of openness of the ending. My two big Friedkin titles, the ones that mean the most to me, are of course the French Connection, which is how I came to Friedkin, and I still think it's probably the best police film ever made overall in terms of effectiveness, grittiness, realism, and just displaying how people, good or bad, are just worn down by the everyday aspects of what happens in this line of work in New York in the pre-sanitized days of 1971. And of course, like Cruising, it helps that it was based on real events. But the other is To Live and Die in LA, and I really do think it's always hard when you're like, oh, I think this is somebody's masterpiece and da 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 da, because you can make the case for anything. You don't want to pigeonhole them just for one film, but there's usually the one film in somebody's filmography that just resonates with you the most, and you read so much into it, and it can be a watershed moment for them. It can be a comeback for them, or it could be a film that unfortunately didn't make much of a splash originally, and has developed a cult following over time. And for Friedkin, that I've always felt is To Live and Die in L.A. I think To Live and Die in L.A. is not just Friedkin's masterpiece and the best film he made, but I think it's really the defining film of the 1980s, and it manages to be a studio film that's also a completely independent film. It was distributed by MGM; they didn't even want it, and it was only made for $6 million, building on elements that you see in Cruising, but also going all the way back to the French Connection in terms of actually shooting on the streets and making it in its production in a very it was made in a very down and dirty fashion. It was made both inside and outside of the studio system when it was in this sort of additional upheaval in the 80s. And I don't think any film could better define William Friedkin than To Live and Die in LA, because of just how it's straddling this fence of official studio backing and release. And so it's a major release film that's also an outsider. It has dark humor, it has wit, but it also has a scathing view of mankind and society. And so I can't help but read into all of these elements, sort of echoes of the films leading up to it, and films that would come later. So when you look at somebody's work, you can't help but see certain themes sort of pop up continually, and you see elements of their style, and most of this stuff is unintentional, and you tell people these things, and if you actually tell it to the person, they're probably going to tell you you're full of it, and you're just what you've seen the film too many times. But it's a natural sort of thing to have that pop up in somebody's body of work. But I've always felt from the first moment I saw it that to live in that that's To Live and Die in LA was just it's something so special. And it's not just a crime film, it's not just an 80s film. It's a film that, has classical film noir elements. It's of course a crime film, but it's also a cop film. But they're not cops; they're Secret Service agents. They're Treasury agents. So everything has a unique little spin on it. And after this point, I think you see elements of To Live and Die in L.A. pop up in many other films. So, like the French Connection to a degree, I think it has sort of seeped in to the collective consciousness. And while To Live and Die in LA has never hit the sort of Blade Runner heights of cult fandom and huge influence, I think to some degree it has a little bit of that sort of its style getting is so deeply infused into everything that came after it that when you do finally see it, you can't help to at least some degree go, oh, that's where this comes from. Okay. And Friedkin selecting Wang Chung to do the score feels very much like his selecting Tangerine Dream to do the Sorcerer score. So you can't help but recognize a lot of elements in To Live and Die in LA that are similar or part and parcel with his other films. So I think there's a little bit of all of his previous films in To Live and Die in LA. And it also helps that it is ridiculously grungy and gritty and sleazy and beautifully nasty, but it also has a sense of self. It has a sense of humor, but it also understands that, there's not really hope for any of us. So why pretend? Which is probably why I love it so much. So for me, I saw the French Connection young, and that got me interested and following Friedkin's career. And of course, you read all about the New Hollywood group, and all the big name directors, and you want to know more about the ones who are not the biggest top tier names. You kind of wonder what happened to them, and you look at some of their later films. But it wasn't until I came to Live and Die in L.A. a bit later, about a couple years later, where it was just the French Connection blew open the doors for me. And I love seeing The Exorcist, and I think I saw Sorcerer before I saw To Live and Die in L.A. The first time I saw Sorcerer, it was a terrible. I think it was probably the old VHS master or Laserdisc master because it was pan and scan. I saw it on cable. It was not the best way to see it, but even seeing it that way, it was ridiculously intensive. And then it was like, oh, so this is Sorcerer, okay. I can see how this is a freaking movie. But it was To Live and Die in LA that just cemented it, along with hearing Friedkin in interviews be such a ridiculously larger than life character. So that's how I got interested in Friedkin, and it's really these two films that I return to the most. These are the two sort of bedrocks. But if I had to pigeonhole one picture and say, I think this is his best picture. I think this is the one. For me, it's To Live and Die in L.A. I still think it is one of the most underrated films of all time. And if I had to say there was one film that defined an entire decade, that's hard to do for pretty much everything in terms of looking at other decades. Can you name a 70s film that so best represents that decade and how everybody felt at the time? I think you'd have several answers, but for me, I think I can say that for the 80s, because To Live and Die in LA just seems to represent everything from corporate greed to studio culture to the sort of rumblings of independent film before the explosion in the early 90s. There's so much social commentary about where we were in the 80s. There's so many different levels and textures of this film. I never get tired of it. So while it has a lot of similarities to the French Connection, I think it's so profoundly builds upon those that it's always been my favorite Friedkin film, and I think his absolute masterpiece. So let's see if I can catch up with the text chat. Of course, every time I come over here, it jumps, so bear with me, guys. Let's see. Somewhere in the parallel universe, Sorcerer was a massive hit, and Lucas is at a table at the sci-fi cons talking about wanting to do the Star Wars sequel. Yeah. Yeah, in a parallel universe, Sorcerer was a giant hit. This little movie called Star Wars came out and probably did decently enough. And, it barely made back the 10 million budget. And then maybe 3 to 5 years later, or no, because it would have been a quick turnaround. I'd say probably 2 years later, we might have seen the Star Wars sequel, probably not even at Fox, because Lucas had gotten the sequel rights, and it would have been the Splinter of the Mind's Eye, low budget Star Wars sequel, because Splinter of the Mind's Eye, the first Star Wars book, was originally the sequel to Star Wars because nobody thought it was gonna make any money. So, in an alternate universe, that's what happened, and George Lucas made some more lower budgeted features, and never built up Skywalker Ranch and stuff. And Sorcerer was a huge hit, and Friedkin wound up making some other giant A features into the 1980s and beyond. I feel lucky to have Sorcerer on Blu-ray. Yes, that is. I'm still amazed it ever happened. Actually, it was nice it got a digibook when it came out, but there were never really any extras. So that would be one that Warner, or I guess technically it's still under Warner, but they could definitely revisit that, and with a new 4K scan, and really go for broke. And I think now there's a greater fandom for it since it came out on Blu-ray. It's now a film you actually see mentioned, and people have actually seen it. Which is still kind of crazy because, even say back in 2010, if you said Sorcerer, unless it was somebody who knew a lot about 70s Hollywood, or William Friedkin, they were just going to stare at you. They might know there was a Wages of Fear remake, but they probably would have not been able to see Sorcerer. Let's see. Let's see. Chris talking about the birthday party. It's impressive, even though it's one of his earlier films. I'm glad you mentioned that because I did actually go through and grab what I have physical media releases of. Kino has done uh, standard Blu-rays of a number of his early films. Unfortunately, they've started to go out of print, so I just have the Kino release of The Birthday Party, and I'm amazed this ever got a Blu-ray release. Actually, this is a fascinating attempt at bringing a rather tricky play to screen, because it's all primarily confined in one area. It's basically this conversation that never ends, but the levels of tension start to build ridiculously fast. So I think even at this point, you see Friedkin's ability to generate tension to such a degree, and it's also got a standout Robert Shaw performance, because admittedly every Robert Shaw performance is a standout, I'd argue. But I'm happy that this did get a Blu-ray. And for most of these, that he actually did do a little interview. I'm not sure. I guess it was technically for this, or it may have been previously recorded. But he even did little interviews for some of his lesser discussed and lesser known films. Again, that's just the only one I have the Blu-ray of, but you can actually pick up some of his earliest work on Blu-ray. Even his first film, the Sonny and Cher film, Good Times, which Kino did release, and that's one of the most bizarre sort of starts for a big name in Hollywood. Okay, who directed the Sonny and Cher film? Yeah, William Friedkin directed it, and you're like, "It- this does not compute." I mean, and pretty much everybody likes Sonny and Cher, but it's just such a bizarre sort of combination. So that one took me a while to sort of figure out how all that came together. But primarily, what I have on physical media are a couple odds and ends, mostly talking about the French Connection, which I have on the Laserdisc releases. I have the repackage of the deluxe DVD, and of course, I also have the Signature Series Blu-ray, which is the super important release to have because it has the corrected transfer, all most of all the old extras, and it has the original mono mix, which was only on the Blu-rays and the initial magnetic video VHS release back in the 70s. So this is really how you need to have the film in your physical media collection. And thankfully, after the sort of panic buying, it has finally come back into stock most places, but it being Fox, there's no telling if they're going to run out of copies they have in warehouses. So I would say if you haven't gotten a copy of this, do go ahead and get one sooner rather than later, because there's no telling if Disney will ever decide to actually give the 4K really needed treatment to one of the greatest films ever made, because Disney's treatment of the Fox catalog makes zero sense. And I think we're all well aware of that by now. And then, of course, I have my various copies of To Live and Die in LA. I have the MGM Special Edition DVD. This is just one of those random old Target slipcovers they used to do, but it's just the special edition. And this is where Friedkin did participate and make some extras. And this hasn't really ever gotten the super transfer tweaks, but he did participate in remixing the sound, which was tweaked a little. And I'm sure he pushed the color timing a little. And then that got upgraded to the MGM Blu-ray, which was the version we had around for quite some time. And then we finally got the 4K new scan, which turned up on Blu-ray. Shout here, and I picked up the Arrow release, which has original poster art, lovely new extras, and this one was a bit better in the encoding than the Shout disc, as most UK releases of stuff released here is from particular labels. But I just went with the Arrow because it had the better package and encoding, and of course lovely artwork as well. And now this has been supplanted because Kino Lorber has put out their new UHD, which I had actually ordered in their big summer sale. So that's actually on its way to me. And I was looking forward to diving back into the film and becoming enmeshed in it again. And now, unfortunately, I have to do it with this news, and thinking about Friedkin's passing the whole time. But at least we have something to sort of celebrate with one of his signature films getting the 4K UHD treatment. So I'm looking forward to diving into that, and then of course comparing it to my many other copies. And I didn't put the soundtrack behind me. I guess I should have, because I'm obsessed with the soundtrack too, as you should be. It's one of the great film scores. And then I also have some of his later films, which you can pick up for dirt cheap, because he did most of these for Paramount. Because, of course, he was married to Sherry Lansing, who wound up running Paramount for a good number of years. And even in some of these that are more sort of, I guess, technically you'd call them more director for hire, there's still moments of interest. So I have some of these on DVD and I have some on Laserdisc. So I have the basketball film Blue Chips, which is a pretty easy LD to pick up. And, it's just a standard Paramount release. But again, it's interesting to see the sort of directions his career took. He didn't ever do the same thing over and over. You can't say that about him. And then I have this a copy of Jade, which is a little on the beat up side, but I've always thought the poster image was very striking. This is very simplistic. This film doesn't have a great reputation nor a great video transfer. There's still some interesting stuff here, and of course, he tried doing another car chase. So this is technically his third big attempt at a car chase to follow the two giant legendary ones, and French Connection and To Live and Die in LA. As I mentioned before, this has the director's cut he made, which is better, but I've only seen it once. And it was only released on VHS and not even in widescreen, just like this Laserdisc is not widescreen, because for some reason, when this film was released on video, Friedkin thought that widescreen was a bad thing. So you have to jump to later releases to get the theatrical version in matted widescreen. But that director's cut is only on VHS, and it pops up on streaming every once in a while. So I'm hoping at some point that can actually get an HD release, at least that's widescreen on a Blu-ray, maybe with the theatrical cut branched. I think that would be a good thing, because I've seen it once, but it was a long time ago. But I do remember it being better, and I would like to see it again. So I've kind of held off on buying a random VHS tape I had to pay more, quite a bit for on eBay, because I knew as soon as I did, it probably would turn up, announced for a new Blu-ray release, and I'm like, I also don't want to spend $35 or more on a single VHS tape, because that just feels wrong to do in this day and age. Even if it's rare, it's still just like, here I am on eBay looking at VHS tapes again. What have I done? But you can also look at some of his later films, which are really interesting on the standard Paramount releases. So I have the DVDs of Rules of Engagement and The Hunted, both featuring the always great Tommy Lee Jones, who is far too underutilized, I think, and has some really great performances in these. And Friedkin participated and actually did not only extras for these, but each of these has an audio commentary. So he would even do commentaries for his lesser regarded films or more modern films, and you can get these for dirt cheap, and they're far better than what you'd think. They're not, the sort of generic action thriller they're sort of marketed as. And you've got another Freakin' picture in the late 90s and early 2000s. You've actually got several of them, but these are just the only other two that I have. And then he would sort of have another kind of bouncing back into people's radar or knowledge with the 2006 film Bug, which is quite good, and then Killer Joe, which I loved, which is I think one of the best Matthew McConaughey performances, and it's wonderfully grisly and nasty in tone in places. So if you're like me and you love To Live and Die in LA, it's wonderful for that. And of course, it did have to deal with getting. I think it got stuck with the NC-17 rating for a while, and that just lets you know this is going to be a fun time at the movies because this is a story that's going to have some real fun to it in terms of actually having some real grit. So that was a fun film to see. I just haven't gotten the Blu-ray yet. I've always meant to. It's one of the few that's sort of eluded me. I just haven't picked it up yet, and that would be another one that would be a great idea if somebody wanted to do a more boutique or a boutique label wanted to pick it up and do a fancier release, or maybe put it out as a UHD with a new scan. But that's just what I have in terms of physical media releases. Except I also pulled, because Freakin would always talk about his big influences, and of course the big one is the film he saw as a kid that made him want to go and make films, was Citizen Kane. And I think it's also the sort of, it's not just because Citizen Kane is such a landmark and so life changing. That's one thing, but I think because Kane has a mischievous streak to it. It has that sort of outsider status, and I think that also so appealed to Friedkin, because I think that if you have any sense of being the outsider, or if you're able to understand that in some instances it's Orson Welles being a magician and having fun with you, and if you're part of the audience that can understand that you can look behind the curtain and understand that part of it is a gag, part of it is to get a reaction, I think that just makes it so much more endearing. So I think that's part of why probably Friedkin was so enamored of Kane from the get-go. And the other is of course you have to talk about his Hitchcock influence, and Psycho is really one of pretty much the key Hitchcock film for him that he would talk about. And of course, you talk about Friedkin's usage of suspense and his ability to create incredible, insane amounts of tension without dialogue. It's of course fitting that his great Hitchcock obsession, his favorite Hitchcock film would be Psycho, which is the most completely focused usage of Hitchcock's abilities to use cinematic technique to create and craft tension to an unbearable degree. So that's why, if you want to understand Friedkin and if you wanted to know his cinematic sort of references and his sort of cinematic background, outside of getting into the French New Wave and a lot of European films, his real foundations are Citizen Kane and Psycho, among other Hitchcock films. But there's also one other that I think doesn't get mentioned, and I think is actually just as important. And he did talk about this at some points, and actually wound up doing a commentary for it. And it's really a whole body of films, but it's this one in particular, and I can completely understand why he was so enamored with this film, because of this body of films. This one has the most sort of hallmarks of what I think we would expect in Friedkin's work, and that is the third Val Lewton RKO horror film, The Leopard Man, which did get a William Friedkin commentary on it, where he talks about seeing this as a young boy, just like how he saw Citizen Kane, and how this film completely obliterated his mind. And when you look at the Luton films, you know a lot about them. They're all about building a psychological terror, but also a sense of the world around the people. The characters feel three dimensional and they feel like they live in the real world. This all sounds like I'm talking about The Exorcist, doesn't it? And there's so much usage of the techniques of the Luton films in The Exorcist. So for me, when I see The Exorcist, I can't help but think this is Friedkin pulling on all the things that he learned from the Luton films. But in The Leopard Man, this one is also, it's technically a proto slasher film because it is about a serial killer, and it is about multiple people in a small town environment dying in horrible ways and in incredibly powerful, atmospheric, terrifying ways that builds to an unbearable level of tension without any dialogue and using shadows, visuals, and the full abilities of sound design. Again, it sounds like I'm talking about scenes from The Exorcist, doesn't it? So, I think Luton's influence, and of course Jacques Tourneur as well, is huge on Friedkin. And when you look at the nine Luton horror films, they basically fall into sort of blocks of three, and the first three were directed by Jacques Tourneur, of which The Leopard Man is the third and final one he would do. And this is the of the Luton films, this is the most sort of pared down. This is the one where it's really about the big sequences that build up to the deaths, especially the opening one, focusing around Teresa Delgado, the poor young girl who's out alone and there's a leopard on the loose, and it builds to an unbearable amount of tension and suspense and horror. And you can just imagine, as Freakin describes in the commentary, as he goes over every single detail and what it's meant to him over his life, about it being a young child seeing this in a theater where they were just running old B films, and this comes on, and it's so clearly way above everything else he was used to seeing, and he's just literally frightened out of his wits and blown away. So this is a huge, enormous influence on him, I would argue. And I do think when you listen to the commentary he recorded first for the DVD ported to this Shout Blu-ray, I think The Leopard Man is the third. I think it's the other key film of his influences, even though he didn't really name check it outside of occasionally mentioning the Luton films and then doing the commentary for The Leopard Man. But when you look at the Luton canon of horror films, the Leopard Man is more modern in ways, and at the time it was seen as a bit of an oddball and kind of a misfire. But it plays really well with modern audiences, and it is a sort of proto slasher film. But there's so many elements, and especially those sequences that you feel are, if you know Friedkin's style and you know that he saw this as a young kid, you're like, okay, I can see. I can see the connecting line here. So the first, as soon as I heard his commentary, yeah, I was like, this makes so much sense. I totally get this. So I think you really have the three influencing films of Citizen Kane, Psycho, and I think the third is most definitely The Leopard Man. Let's see. Of course, every time I try to catch up with this, I have to find my place again. So sorry, I'm sort of peering off to the side of my camera and looking crazy. Let's see. Oh yes, yes. There's the great Friedkin interview with Fritz Lang. That is brilliant. It's on YouTube. You can watch it. It's like an hour and a half long, but it is just incredible. And yeah, he got the guy off death row when he was starting out and trying to make that documentary film. That's amazing in and of itself, especially doing that back in the day, when that was just not something that people conceived of doing. Yeah, and as you say, Friedkin would always talk about the work and the masters of the past, and even when he was talking about his own films, he'd be like, yeah, I thought I did really good, but it's not Citizen Kane. It's not. It's not the train chase with Keaton on the front of the train in the general. He would always pay tribute and never see himself as uh, he never put himself on the same level. He did have that reverence always preserved. Yeah, Criterion has not ever, as you say, Chris. They don't have any Friedkin films. They would be the ones to do Sorcerer as a UHD because they have their relationship with Warner now, and since Warner put out the Blu-ray, the Criterion could do one heck of a Sorcerer release, do some new extras, and of course they've also got Wages of Fear, so that there's video synergy for you. So, and now they're doing UHDs, so that would sell well. I think that would Sorcerer would probably be the one they could get the rights to and do a good release, and I think it would fit in the collection. Be great if they did the French Connection, and that would also help make up for the Criterion Channel streaming the Disney streaming edit, and then that sort of fallout because they Disney's not doing anything with it, and I don't think they're planning on doing a 4K scan. So it would be up to a boutique label, and it is one of the great important American films. And I don't see Warner letting The Exorcist out to anybody. So it's definitely possible, but I would think Criterion would do Sorcerer's UHD probably. Oh, thanks, BHF. Yeah, I had to say something about the French action edit. I'm amazed that people started talking about it because I talked about it a little bit about a year before because I heard some rumblings when it showed up on TCM, and then I think because it was Criterion Channel, a lot more people saw it, and then that just sort of blew up for a while. I'm glad people are aware. It's definitely not something that bodes well for the future of catalog titles, but I'm just glad people are aware of what was done now. PK King Crimson, PK King Crimson Requiem says, kind of weird of Warner's to give The Exorcist all this love, but silently giving the devils the cold shoulder. I think that's Warner Home Video in a nutshell, because they always do something with The Exorcist because they know they can make money out of it, or they can get Friedkin to supervise a new cut, and they can remix the audio again, and they can put a few new extras on, or they could repackage the old disc again, but they try to pretend the devils doesn't exist. And I don't know if there's a more clear cut case of decades of a studio trying to not just censor, but completely pretend a film doesn't exist and refuse to ever release it or actively block its release. And it seems to be not just the studio, but like particular people at Warner. It's absolutely bizarre. And then when you actually do see the film, it's not at all what people claim it to be. And it's got so many profound moments and concepts, and it really sticks with you. And it should be seen by everyone. It is an incredibly powerful film. It's not for the faint-hearted, but it's also designed to make you think, and it asks a lot of questions. They're not easy questions. So I think, unfortunately, the sort of reputation it's gotten, and the fact that somebody at Warner actively has an axe to grind against it has not helped. Let's see. Mr. Ed Weirdo shows says should have been a French Connection 3. What happened in real life regarding the drug case overseas made the first two films look like no big deal by comparison. Yeah, it's an amazing story to read, and of course, it was based on the Robin Moore novel or book, I should say, about the actual events. Um, as much as I love the first film, when you look at the actual script from a narrative perspective, it's not doing all of the case, and it's actually more on the simple side. So it's one of those films where it's the atmosphere, it's the energy generated, it's the direction, it's the performances, and the realism along with the script sort of providing the spine for everything to hang on. It's all the elements coming together to make it work. So they definitely could have done a third film. French Connection 2 is an odd film. I will admit that. I think there's so much great stuff in there, and I think it's a great concept. Unfortunately, the script kind of goes and fits in spurts, and they brought in John Frankenheimer to direct it, who is a brilliant choice. And Frankenheimer and Friedkin I both kind of discovered around the same time, and both had that sort of career period where they were no longer in vogue, and they had to really struggle to get back into that. And both really had their sort of reemergences around the same time in the 80s. Friedkin with To Live and Die in LA, and Frankenheimer with the incredibly underrated 52 pickup. And you want to talk about a double feature made in heaven, those two films should be double featured always. um but French Connection 2, it's more in that the script is kind of unsatisfying in ways, but it has so many nice standout moments, and the performances are great. And I remember when I saw it as a kid, I will never forget the ending of that film. The ending of that film makes up for all the issues I have with the script leading up to that. Even though Frankenheimer has some really lovely, very intense scenes sort of sprinkled throughout, the ending of French Connection 2 is incredible. And simply from a filmmaking perspective, how he was able to simulate the first person perspective with a heavy camera at the time as the character is running, and the sense of tension that's generated. And you could only end a film like that in the 70s. You just can't do that anymore. That sort of climactic but also hollow in a way, ending that doesn't give you the satisfying conclusion you want. And so in that sense, it actually echoes the ending of the original film. So it's sort of like a bookend. It's a French Connection 2 is an addendum to the original film. It does its own thing, and it's fascinating to look at. Yes, I think the story is a bit messy in places, but gosh, that ending has always stuck with me. And I absolutely think that is an incredible ending. And so I still really love French Connection 2, even though I don't think it's as good, obviously, as the original film. But yes, they definitely could have done a third film. Although it's kind of weird thinking that French Connection almost was a 70s franchise. It's like, imagine taking that type of film and turning it into what it passes for a franchise now, and having the big summer movie be the French Connection 3, a hard R rated gritty film with Gene Hackman's Popeye Doyle, and doing stories ripped out of real life. And that was the big summer movie. I wish that was the world we lived in. Unfortunately, it is not. But it's crazy to think we almost had a full French Connection franchise. Okay, let me try and catch up here. Jason points out To Live and Die in LA. It makes a great orange LA double feature with Tequila Sunrise. Yes, I love that film. That film is so underrated. That's one of those films that, no, it's not perfect, but it's so well done, and so so wonderfully textured that I've treasured it ever since I first saw it. I think that's Robert Towns' best picture that he made. I absolutely love that film. If you have not seen it, please go and check it out. It's one of the absolute hidden gems of the 1980s. It deserves such a better treatment. Unfortunately, the Blu-ray they came out with isn't the greatest. It's like an encoding flaw for part of it. After like a certain point, the Warner Blu-ray has defective video that they never fixed. So that is a film that cries out for a 4K scan and a UHD presentation. That was a beautifully shot film by Conrad Hall. There's one particular sequence I'll never forget, where the two lead characters are talking and have a sort of emotional conversation, but it's all done in a long shot at sunset. And if I'm remembering correctly, that's when they go to they walk up to like a little kid's playground, and they sit in the swings, and it's all in a long shot, but you hear their voices on the soundtrack. And the lead trio of Mel Gibson and Kurt Russell and Michelle Pfeiffer are all incredible. That's my favorite Kurt Russell performance ever. Period. End of story. And Mel Gibson's great, and he's doing something atypical of the films they would put him in, and it's got a great soundtrack. One of the compilation soundtracks from the '80s. I think it's one of the great '80s compilation soundtracks. So yeah, perfect to go with To Live and Die in LA. Wonderful, sort of same sun drenched, but in their heart and souls, everybody's kind of miserable no matter what. Even have money, they're still miserable, and everything is gritty, and people are more about posturing than their actual true selves. Yes, Night They Raided Minsky's is really good. I haven't seen it in a long while. I think that also got a Kino Blu-ray, but I think that may have gone out of print. Or no, or wait, that might be the one that Olive did. Yeah, I think Olive did that one. So it for Friedkin's early pre-French Connection films, it's I think Kino did most of them, and I think Minsky's was the one that Olive Films did. So I don't know. Kino might pick up the rights to that. They've been picking up the rights to various Olive films and putting them out now that Olive is no more. So I don't know. They might do that with Minsky since they've done Olive Freakin's other early films. Oh yes, Seven Ups is great. Yeah, that is basically the unofficial French Connection sequel before French Connection 2, because Roy Scheider is basically playing the same character, although the name is different. And in the annals of great film car chases, yeah, there's Bullet in the French Connection, there's Ronin, there's To Live and Die in L.A., and then right there under it is the Seven Ups. That is the other great you can't breathe car chase. That's the one that nobody talks about. That's the sort of sleeper one. And it's of course fitting that the best car chases are dominated by Frankenheimer and Friedkin mostly, but the Seven Ups is you have the same producer as Bullet in the French Connection, and you have the co-lead of the French Connection, and you have the other great car chase in cinema. So it's basically French Connection 1.5 in a different city. I mean, it's so clearly designed to follow the French Connection. But that is a great film if you need something that is pure '70s, and again, one of the great car chases. Period. End of story. And unfortunately, it's the one that nobody talks about. Okay, I think I'm finally starting to catch up with the chat. Let's see. Okay, yep. Talk about Sorcerer needing a new scan in UHD. Yes, I can't believe I hadn't thought of that before, but yeah, that would be right up Criterion's alley, I think. So if Warner does have the rights in perpetuity, which I guess they do, I could definitely see Criterion tackling Sorcerer, and they'd come up with some super arty cover and hopefully some good new extras. So I hope they do that, because that seems like it's right up their alley. Okay, G-Man talking about the UHD release of The Exorcist, because it's going to include the original soundtrack without Lost and DTS HD for the theatrical cut. Yeah, I've read some stuff about the new Exorcist release is actually going to at least be a little bit better in regards to not forcing you to stick 100% with the latest version and the latest soundtrack. But yeah, I don't think we're gonna get the actual original theatrical version properly presented with the original mono anytime soon, unfortunately. Let's see. Okay. Joshua saying, "It's so strange. I literally just picked up the Kino Blu-ray of Freakin's The Brink Job out of pure curiosity." I bought it too. I'd been meaning to get it, and it was in the sale, and I was already getting to Live and Die in LA, and I'm like, you know what? I've missed some of the others, and I'm just gonna go ahead. And I had no idea this was happening. So yeah, I guess we were all on the same wavelength. So ooh, Joe Blow saying Rear Window over Psycho. Yeah, asking people about their Hitchcock opinions always gives you uh, honestly, I look at it as different insight, because everybody has preferences. It's just I prefer it when people actually know all of, or at least most of the films. I hate it when people only know the most famous 3 or 4 Hitchcock titles, and they act like that's it, and it's like, no. I mean, Friedkin himself said that, people should just quit film school and go study every film Hitchcock ever made, and he was right, you know? That's literally that's absolutely perfect because you will absolutely learn everything, and you'll also, more importantly, learn things that you like and things that you don't like because you actually have to think about things. There are some Hitchcock films that just don't gel it with you as much, and there's some that were problematic. There's some that Hitchcock didn't like. There's some that have elements that don't work. And that's how you learn about films. You have to actually study them. And then you become the crazy person who actually likes Topaz, like I do. And I can make the case for any of them. I like the parodying case. I'm that guy. Um, and I'm also the person who also likes to stick up for some of the other films. So one of my favorite ones to throw out. I hate how some films get so overshadowed. No pun intended, because I'm going to talk about Shadow of a Doubt. Everybody talks about Shadow of a Doubt. Yes, it's a great film. Yes, it's a masterpiece. And in some ways, it's kind of like, what if Hitchcock and Capra made a film together, because it's kind of like a morbid proto It's a Wonderful Life in terms of recreating the small town, and of course the getting that sense from having Thornton Wilder write the work on the screenplay. That was a masterstroke. But I like Saboteur more. I think Saboteur is horrendously underrated, but I also gravitate more towards the Wrong Man thrillers because I'm, a lifelong James Bond fanatic, and the Hitchcock adventure Wrong Man thrillers are, the primary DNA of the Bond films. And there are so many elements of Saboteur I absolutely adore, and I think that film is so incredibly undervalued. So I'm always, rearing for the underdogs, because I'm like, well, can you talk about Saboteur once? Can you talk about Foreign Correspondent, one of the greatest films ever made? And before the Criterion release came out, that was probably the one I championed most because nobody would talk about it. So I'm glad at least people know Foreign Correspondent more now. But that both Correspondent and Saboteur have a huge influence on the Bond films because you have Richard Maybaum involved, uncredited, in the screenwriting, particularly on Foreign Correspondent. But if you look at those two films, you can, along with, of course, the 39 Steps starting it, you can see the sort of core framework of a Bond film decades beforehand. It's not just North by Northwest like everybody likes to talk about. It goes all the way back to the 39 Steps. But yeah, having Hitchcock hot takes is always fun, and I always do it with a little wink and because in all seriousness, I don't quite mean it. I kind of lean more towards some of the lesser discussed ones because I think they're all masterworks and should be studied. I've seen Waltzes from Vienna multiple times. I know most people haven't. So I try to read things even into the short films or Adventure Malagash or there's so much. I will never stop Hitchcock analyzing. I don't think you can really. Oh, 4K's asking, 4K Cinema HD asking about the Brinks job Kino Blu-ray. Yeah, I would pick it up, because the sale is, I guess, technically it ends. I know it's supposed to end tomorrow, but I guess that might be tonight or in the morning or something. But yeah, I would just go ahead because unfortunately their other freaking titles have kind of gone out of print, and I wish I'd picked up some of those. But yeah, it's been a long time since I've seen it, so I'm looking forward to revisiting it on the Blu-ray release. Oh yeah, I forgot Leopard Man on the Shout Blu-ray is out of print. However, I will say, the big thing about this, they got the new, I think this was one of the ones that was done from a 4K scan, if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah, yeah. Basically, these would have all been Warner Archive releases. There's still a few that are not out on Blu-ray yet, and it's always been rumored that Criterion is just sitting on them because they like to do that and drive us insane. So it still kills me we don't have all of them out yet. this is basically the same transfer Warner Archive would have done. They did the most important thing is the new Konstantin Nasser commentary that was done for this release, where he uncovered some incredible research. But unfortunately, there's a real problem with the audio track here. There's a lot of hum and noise in it that does kind of mar this. So this is one of those discs that I've really been hoping somebody would redo. The picture quality is really unbelievably marvelous compared to what we've had before, and the new commentary was absolutely incredible. But unfortunately, it does have some major sound problems. So I'm hoping, since this is now out of print, that maybe Warner Archive will just put out their own version. And I don't know if they will, but I certainly hope so, because I think they would actually address the really bad audio problem that's on here. But of course, I'm obsessed with the Luton films, and every other review didn't mention the audio problems, because I've seen these films too much. I watch them usually twice a year sometimes, and of course, I notice things like that. So don't spend a crazy amount, but this is definitely one of the films you definitely need. You can still get the DVDs based on the old standard F masters, but definitely pick this up if you can, for the new picture transfer and the amazing commentary, plus Friedkin's commentary ported over from the DVD. But just do be aware there is a pretty big audio problem in terms of hiss and hum that drives me bonkers. The power of monaural sound compels you. Yeah. Let's see. Oh, I hate when it jumps. My apologies. Alan, just on Sorcerer on Laserdisc a couple weeks ago. Finally, should have been seen more back then. It's great. Yeah, I've tried to get it on LD. It's one of those. It rarely pops up, and then usually when it does, it's a bit pricey, and it's just it's pan and scan, unfortunately. But I'd like to have that just to look at the soundtrack, but at least it's available now in on the Blu-ray release. Uh, oh, Tiny Purple Fish is hearing the news right now. Okay, yeah, one of the most crazy directors ever to live, but also one of the best. Yeah, he was definitely a character, and you can honestly picture him being one of the big name directors and characters of the old studio days. All the crazy anecdotes you read about the legends of back then. Well, can you imagine Hurricane Billy in the in the 1930s, firing a gun on set to get a particular reaction? Well, there were some directors back then who did some crazy things like that. So he probably would have got into fist fights with the studio moguls, but he definitely would have fit in with some of the original characters. Honest Blu-ray saying, asked the BFI if they'd talk to Warner again about the Devils. He said no. I don't blame him. The way they were treated about their release and the DVD and stuff. That was probably not fun for them. So I think they definitely got burned on that experience. No pun intended. If you know the film, of course, getting burned. Yeah, Friedkin just talking about favorite films. Yes. Oh, again, he was very magnetic. So absolutely. Yeah. I can't stop when I find a new little Friedkin bit or interview or something. Some people don't like his Leopard Man commentary because he's just kind of reacting to the film and sharing his own personal experience. But I think it's relating to it in a more personal way. That's how I look at it. So he's literally talking about his mental process with it and his history with it. And while he's describing the things that are going on, it's always done in a sort of way where it's like he's reminding himself of the elements that so struck him and what stuck with him. And so that's why I realized how important this must have been to him, because I think you could see echoes of it throughout his later his own films. French Connection 3, Electric Boogaloo. Yeah. There is no new Hollywood without him, even though he's older than the movie brats. That's another thing. I should have mentioned that before, but I think that's another element that sort of separated him from I guess like the main group, because it's funny when you actually look at it. It's just like in high school. There's all the different cliques and there's the different classes and the different ages, and sometimes everybody comes together and they all kind of hang out, but they all have their little realms they move in. And I like sort of associating Friedkin with Frankenheimer in the way that both of them had careers that had really big highs at a certain point, and then they were sort of viewed more as journeymen for the latter half of their career, and they had ups and downs and different things. But Frankenheimer was even earlier in terms of he started really hitting his stride in the '60s, and both of them did start originally working in television. Frankenheimer much more, and he was in the golden age of live television. But Friedkin also started working in television, a number of years later, and had the infamous bit where he directed an Alfred Hitchcock Presents episode and almost got fired because he was not necessarily the typical studio television episode director. So I find that so amusing, just the thought, and would have loved to have been a fly on the wall during the shooting of that episode. Doing a trailer voice of the of the third French Connection franchise film. Oh my gosh! You know what? I'll try and do this. Why not? I hope this doesn't blow out my microphone. I don't know how it's going to pick up, but the final chapter of the saga. Popeye Doyle is the one thread hanging New York from falling to total destruction. Gene Hackman returns in this summer's The French Revolution. Dot dot dot. The French Connection 3. Sorry, I can't ever resist. Anybody says trailer voice, I have to do it. Floating Peak talking about just hearing the news and Sorcerer being completely underrated. Yes, unfortunately, that's most freaking films are so supremely underrated. So hopefully, this does encourage more people to go back and dig further than the big names. Yeah, yeah, it is crazy that we've lost both Friedkin and Owen Roisman in the same year. Unfortunately, this is just going to keep getting worse. We're just with the passage of time, all of our legends and big names are getting on up there in years. So this just unfortunately just naturally going to get worse and worse. Unfortunately, not to be morbid. Um, Gary's Comics and Movies. Thanks. Oh, thanks for doing this. Oh, well, no problem. I was trying to figure out what I was going to do and if I should just do a little video or something. But I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna chat with you guys because Friedkin is one of the directors that I latched onto early on. So he's one of the people I really started to study in my younger days. And you have a couple names. You have like the 5 or 10 or the 10 or 15 directors where you really start to study people's careers, and that's where the sort of door opens for you, and then you go down the lifelong rabbit hole of film analysis because that's how you're wired. So I've spent a lot of years looking at Friedkin's work and filmography. So that's why it hit me quite hard this morning. I was just like, oh damn. And then I'm like, I got to put something together, but I don't know what. So I just figured I'd go the live route. Yes, Free Connection is a brilliant book. I was talking before. I just don't have a physical copy. I read it back when it came out, and then just always meant to get a physical copy. I think they did come out with a paperback. Like I think it's got an updated cover, so that you can get the paperback version for less. But yeah, it's a really great read, very very insightful, also very funny, and also he does mention a lot of anecdotes and things that are of course very amusing and fit in with all the all the crazy and wild anecdotes throughout the industry about Friedkin. Um, oh, got some more Hitchcock hot takes. Oh, awesome! always always up for Hitchcock hot takes. Ooh, Joe Blow not into Topaz. Okay, I get it. I know it's a hard sell. I kind of like the dual ending. I know I don't. Honestly, all 3 endings, they actually work in their own ways. It's just none of them feel like they were the full they all kind of feel like the execution. It's just they have a certain flatness to them. The 3rd one doesn't really count because it was just literally an edit job. It was the last ditch. It could have worked, it had that been the original concept, but the duel is what the film was meant to end with. The second ending at the airport, that's the most that one technically works the best, and I get them putting it on the video version, but I'm one of the people who kind of likes the dual ending. So um I do appreciate you mentioning Terrence Fisher in the same sentence as Hitchcock, because talk about one of the most underrated directors in the history of the cinematic medium. And I think there are 2 directors who so incredibly picked up on what Hitchcock did and found their own ways of doing that and sort of carried the baton forward. Most people just try to copy Hitchcock, and or you're Brian De Palma and you make the Hitchcock homage films where you're kind of regurgitating some things and putting your own spin on it. But I think there are 2 directors who actually took the baton, if you will, of Hitchcock, or they took the torch and they sort of carried it forward some. I think one is Terrence Fisher. I think he could direct a suspense sequence better than most anyone. I think the scene in Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed, with the body buried in the backyard, and then all of a sudden a water main breaks or the sewer line breaks and the water starts shooting up, and Veronica Carlson literally starts losing her mind at knowing what's going to happen, the suspense of that sequence. And then you start to see the dirt being moved, and the actual dirt of it's like the flower bed starts to lower as all the people start crowding around because, oh, look, the water line's broken, and you just see her mentally just completely shatter. And she's just that is one of the most incredible suspense set pieces that nobody talks about, and it has that dash of morbid Hitchcock humor to it. So I think Terrence Fisher is the one. The other is, of course, the other Terrence I'm obsessed with, Terrence Young, who uh, did the most Hitchcockian moments in cinema that Hitchcock himself did not do. And all you have to do is look at From Russia with Love. Yes, they lifted the idea of the crop duster from North by Northwest because they needed an action beat to beef up the final act of the film, but that entire film, if you said that Hitchcock directed it, most people would probably believe you, simply due to the the generation of suspense and the maintaining of it. But Young had this energy, and he had a sardonic wit, but also a sense of upping the feeling of danger even more than what Hitchcock would do. So that was his own spin on it. And then all you have to do is see Wait Until Dark, and that's like imagine if Dial M for Murder was on steroids. you know, except the tension is mounted by it basically, it's almost practically done in real time. And you have the same Broadway play stage basis, but that film builds to a ridiculous level of tension. But how it one ups itself over Dial M for Murder is the lead female character isn't just Grace Kelly being menaced. This time it's Audrey Hepburn, and of course her character is blind. So that just adds so much more to the stakes of the drama being told, and the whole film just winds itself continually until you know at some point that that tension is going to snap, and when it does, it's just absolutely incredible. So for me, the two Terrences are the ones that I always have felt are the most Hitchcockian. They weren't ostensibly trying to be. That was just how they would do suspense, and so that's why that's another reason why I admire them so much. But that's why I'm so happy you mentioned Terrence Fisher in the same sense as Hitchcock, because I think he should be. I think he has a lot of very similar sensibilities to Hitchcock, and most people don't look at Fisher seriously, which is unfortunate because he is one of the great directors, and I'd actually argue he's one of the greatest horror directors ever. I think there are really three who are the sort of titans of the horror film. I think you have James Whale. I think you have Jacques Tourneur, and the third is Terence Fisher, and those are those are the legends of the genre. That's really my own opinion. And Friedkin is in there, but he didn't keep making horror films. He did a lot of other things, and he didn't want to be pigeonholed as a genre director. But for being so identified with the genre and doing so much for it, I think that's why Fisher is so incredibly important. But even in his horror films, you have breathtaking usage of suspense and building of suspense sequences. Let's see. Oh wow. Joshua Sutliff says, used to be annoyed with people who claim to love Hitchcock, but only had seen Psycho or the Birds until I met a guy at work who referred to Norman Bates as, quote, that guy from the Bates Motel show. That is when I would put my head through the literal wall. So I feel your pain there. Yeah, unfortunately, we're getting to the point where people only know like one Hitchcock film, or they know Psycho and Rear Window, and maybe that's about it. So you know, it's just, that's a sad thought. Um, uh, Gary's comics movies talked about. Leper Man was an excellent commentary by Friedkin, as was Narrow Margin. Yeah, I'm glad he did a number of commentaries. Again, I know they're not everybody's favorites, but it's really cool getting somebody's perspective on a classic. And again, it's not something big name directors did all the time, so it is a kind of novelty in that sense. Let's see. Renan talking about Freak directed a lot of classics. What are your thoughts on the Exorcist sequels? And yeah, we're getting the new one. Actually, I think isn't it Warner's doing a new Exorcist? Isn't it supposed to be like a trilogy of films or something? I know they're I guess they're trying to make a whole Exorcist multiverse thing franchise. I'm not exactly sure. Uh to be honest, I've seen I think I've seen all the main sequels, but is only really once. And then you've got the more modern one where it started out as a Paul Schrader film, and then he got booted off, and so it kind of turned into something else. Um, I guess I should take a look at them again, because I saw them once years and years ago, but I just didn't really. I mean, I guess they're okay, but I don't know. I've never been big into the whole possession subgenre of horror films that exploded after The Exorcist. So I guess for me, it's one of those cases where the thing that sort of spawned this sort of subgenre is so impactful and so well done that nothing really matches up to it. And there's been so many films working in that same realm that are not up to its standard, that everything, even if it's pretty good or has good elements, kind of pales in comparison, if you will. So yeah, I guess I should look at those again, because I have not seen them in a long time. Yeah, Seven Ups is great. It's had several Blu-ray releases and different masters. I still just have the DVD, because I've been trying to figure out when I remember to double check it. there's at least like 3 different Blu-rays now. There was the UK one, I think that was Second Sight, and then, or no, yeah, maybe it was. I can't remember. That there was a UK one, there was a German one, I think, and now we've got one here. So I need to pick up one of those. But it did have like all the transfers have slightly different color timing, so it's one of those because we had it from it was Twilight time here, and that master looked different to the European master. So that's one of those films where it's kind of difficult to know which Blu-ray is technically better because they all kind of look a little different. Yeah, that's true. Film directors have lost that crazy factor. You know, you don't need to go full crazy. Just a little bit here and there. You need a little bit to spice things up, but also the other argument is, a lot of directors and people working today don't have all the varied life experiences that everybody did even in the 70s, all the things Friedkin did beforehand, getting into documentary work and working in television and struggling to even get into the cinema industry. And then you read about the amazing lives of people in the early days of Hollywood, where just their first 20 years is enough to fill like 3 biographies of how did this person survive, so it's like nowadays we don't have that factor either. Austin picked up To Live and Die in LA on the UHD. Excellent. Yeah, I'm definitely I've been really just dying to get my hands on it and take a look at it. I was just afraid that it was going to have like a super freaking tweaked transfer as most freaking films. Well, all of them you do have to worry about that to some degree. You have to worry, okay, has this been played around with. There has been some discussion already. I know some people are talking about the sound mixes, thankfully, and it does seem like there are some different mixes on here. There's a 5.1 track and a 2.0 track, and I'll be able to look at it when I get mine. I was just trying to build my sale order and mix in some going out of print items. That's why I waited a little. Also, makes it a little easier on the wallet to wait towards the end of the sale because there are so many other things that have been on sale. So I do have to try to pad it out a little bit, even though I'm like, oh god, it's 11 LA on UHD. I have to look at it. So I do expect my usual super long review, but also it's To Live and Die in LA at the same time as Ronin, so two of my greatest cinematic obsessions. So those are probably going to be long videos for me. If people who know me know I'm obsessed with both of those films, and I saw both of them around the same time when I was growing up. So yeah, those are going to be long videos. So I will go into a lot of detail, but I know already that there's some discussion about the transfer and the audio tracks. And To Live and Die in LA has been one of those films where I've never been 100% sure on any various releases accuracy across the board. I knew the MGM versions with the 5.1. I knew that was a remix where things were kind of beefed up a bit and messed around with from the original Dolby Stereo. And I used to listen to the French Dolby Stereo on there and compare them because you can kind of hear the bass track. And it took me forever to find the Laserdisc here. This is the image reissue that has a digital soundtrack. So I do have the best version of the original Dolby Stereo. So this is usually what I compare everything with. But unfortunately, this is not a widescreen disc, but at least it gives you an idea of what the original transfers were like picture wise, and it is the best record I have of the original Dolby Stereo mix. So I will be doing my usual intensive comparisons and film analysis and nerdiness. And yes, I may have written a super long blog essay with a fancy title about both films because I've been obsessed with them for years. Yeah, the reviews have been pretty good so far, or at least seemingly good from the reactions I've heard. But I kind of also like to wait until I get my hands on something to actually dig into it myself, and then sort of I cross reference with anything that's out there. But I'm just I'm glad that there is a 4K release of it. I wish it was getting the full fanfare of like a big deluxe Arrow hard case set or an indicator set or something, instead of just one of Kino's UHDs with a slipcover and maybe a new extra or two in addition to the legacy things. And Kino also has a history of not really putting a lot of effort into their audio tracks and having down mixes and different things. So, I'm hoping it turns out okay, but again, I just haven't gotten my hands on it yet. Let's see. Ooh, talking about talking about tell us any of the original version of American Graffiti. I know that's been a film a lot of fans have wanted to try and restore themselves for a long time, and there is now amazingly they're releasing a UHD of it from Universal, and I'm like, Universal remembers the film exists. I don't believe it, because they've just used the old master over and over, but it won't have the original version with the original mono, and so that's definitely one that the audio is really important because that's early Walter Murch, and he was trying to worldize the track, and it was all done in mono, but all you can hear are versions of his Dolby Stereo revisit from the '70s reissue, and then the home video version. Plus, they changed the original end credits. They changed the text, like some of the characters and dates. So thankfully, the changes are minor. The big one is the audio. So that's the big thing, along with the changing the opening title card shot of the film and adding the CGI sunset. That's been carried over and redone a lot. So those are the big three elements about actually seeing a print of graffiti or doing a scan. But chiefly the big thing is the audio. So that's actually rather exciting. And I'm very curious to see what the UHD will look like because I think I dropped out there for a second. I think I'm back now. Anyway, I was just going to say it'd be amazing to see a Technoscope '70s film with a proper 4K scan and HDR grade and looking like $1 million, like the grungy Technoscope film it's supposed to be. Uh, Jason saw Wait Until Dark on Broadway as a kid with Marisa Tomei and Tarantino. That was interesting. Yeah, I bet. That's an interesting combination. Video store review talking about freaking and his great strength to choose non-traditional artists for soundtracks. Yes. I think he definitely had a musical ear. He is extraordinarily undervalued for that aspect. For me, it's the To Live and Die in LA score. That's my favorite. I think that is an absolutely stupefyingly brilliant score, because it's not just a pop score, and the way that the album is sequenced by putting the actual song tracks on side A and then side B being all the instrumental tracks. I mean, that is the whole concept. I think it's the band's best work. I think the actual soundtrack is their masterpiece. I think they were a very underrated band and still are. And it's also interesting how they used Wait from Points on the Curve as the end title song in the film. So they actually used one of their pre-existing songs that Friedkin really loved just because he loved it. I think the score adds so much to the experience of the film, and the way that it layers in the actual songs with lyrics is it just feels seamless, and I think the music so enhances the experience of the film that I can't think of one without the other, and I've been obsessed with the soundtrack and owned many different versions. Really, my only qualm with the film is I always hate how the original mix, and really none of the mixes, the music isn't as full as the soundtrack recording because I love the music so much. But the sound design of the film is actually very advanced for its time in the mid '80s, working in Matrix Stereo and Dolby Stereo, because Freakin' is trying to do stuff with the actual sound mix to generate more tension in the scenes and use a little bit of sound panning and use the limited nature of Matrix Stereo to at least make a more engaging and aggressive in ways track. So That's another thing I think the film is underrated for is not just the score and the soundtrack, but also even the sound design. Yeah, Chris talking about including Clouseau and the group of great horror directors. Yeah, that's just my own spitballing. There's so many. For me, my big three favorites and the ones I feel are the most impactful are Whale, Fisher, and Turner. But there are so many others. That's just my own little critical feather in my cap, you know. Like, I guess maybe a hot take or something, but those are just the ones that have impacted me the absolute most. But yes, there's so incredibly many. Okay, some more talk about the To Live and Die in LA UHD. Yeah, I've heard good things from some people, and I've heard some people talking about the sound mixes and things. So I'm just waiting on it to get here, and then I'm gonna just totally dive deeply into the realms of seeing HDR has done for the film. And I'm hoping somebody didn't go crazy with the HDR grading. That's always my fear with catalog UHDs now, because unfortunately sometimes they do and it ruins otherwise beautiful new scans. Let's see. Oh, Duke of Funk. Wow, Duke of Funk is here. Need to watch more. Seen the big titles, but just saw Sorcerer for the first time. I'm glad you saw it. I'm just glad it's more available now. That's for sure. And actually seeing it in widescreen. It's the small pleasures in life. Seeing a film in its original aspect ratio. Okay, big fan of Exorcist 3. Exorcist 2 is a fascinating misfire. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to revisit those because I haven't really thought about them much. And then I've only really seen them once or twice, and that was years and years ago. So I definitely am gonna revisit them. Yeah, I've seen Night They Raided Minsky's, but it was a long time ago. And as I said before, I think that's the one early Friedkin film that Olive did a Blu-ray of. So I'm gonna have to track that down, and it might be possible Kino might try and license that and reissue that because they're doing that now with some out of print Olive discs. Oh, Austin first saw Till the Night LA on the old Vestron VHS tape. Yeah. Well, this is technically the Laserdisc. It was Vestron, and then Image put out basically a later pressing, and that's what this is. It just adds a PCM digital soundtrack. So this is basically, as far as I can tell, this is basically just a later pressing of that same Vestron master. So if you get either pressing of the Laserdisc, that's pretty much what you saw on the VHS tape. But this one is actually really tricky to find, and the only way to know is the catalog number, and it's got the Image logo on the front. But yeah, it took me a long time to track this down, but I was determined I was going to find the one that had a PCM soundtrack on it. Okay, talking about John Glenn being another with the Hitchcock style. Yes, he definitely understands perfectly how to build and construct a suspense sequence, and it also helps him being one of the premier editors in the UK in his time, and still being a brilliant editor, and then moving up to the director's chair. Um, uh, it's a shame that none of the great Bond directors had much of a directing career outside the series, but they were also, pretty much considered journeymen. And the career of the journeyman director had significantly changed by the time of the Bond films. So if you look at their non-Bond films, it's a very interesting, again, a very up and down sort of chart. And I always try to look at their other films because I think that's fascinating, and also I'm a bit obsessed. So I'll go and look at every Terrence Young or Guy Hamilton or Lewis Gilbert or Peter Hunt or John Glenn film I can get my hands on, even if it's just a film John Glenn edited. I still want to see it and know about it because they're some of my directing heroes. But Glenn definitely had an innate sense of how to construct a suspense sequence. That is something that is so sorely missing in today's films. I mean, I was sitting there in Mission Impossible 7, and the fact that they kept lifting from the 80s Bond films, particularly the For Your Eyes Only car chase and kind of the plot of For Your Eyes Only in terms of the setup and the Octopussy train fight. And you just can't help but think, what would John Glenn do if he was given $250 million? It's like, can you imagine, if they had given John Glenn that much money to make a big globe-trotting action film? That would be something, because nothing matches up these days to his sequences. That's for sure. Let's see. Got some more people dropping in. Caveman Movies and More. Oh, thanks for dropping in. First time. Oh, I'm glad you guys saw the notice. I was able to get it generated. Again, sorry this was so impromptu, but I felt like I had to put something together. Oh gosh. Deleted says Friedkin died of a broken heart from what they did to the French Connection. Oh, man. Oh yeah, yeah. I think even Friedkin would like that joke. Yeah. um off topic, do you collect movie posters? I do sporadically. I don't really have a big space to display them, but I have a a good handful of posters. Just whenever I come across something that's too good to pass up, or I come across a favorite poster, I would like to someday have a nice collection of original posters. So I always keep an eye out if I see like a really cheap original poster or a theater display piece, something that's not a reprint. Then that's why I've picked up a few here and there. So I've got a small box with some rolled posters, but I just don't really have a good way to display them. And I occasionally have some framed, but I don't have a whole lot. The dream is always to have original Bond posters from the original run for the entire original series. That's one of those little, oh yeah, when I win the lottery type things you think of, because you go and look at the price for an original Goldfinger one sheet that's not folded and is in good condition, and you're like, okay, yeah, put that back in the pipe dream drawer. Oh, Garrick, watched Dr. Cyclops. Awesome. Yeah, oh gosh, the transfer on that thing, I'm just astonished that got a new transfer. Have you ever thought of doing a history of sci-fi video like your various horror ones? Um, that's a good idea. I should probably dabble in doing some more videos about the development of science fiction films, but all of those are such big topics. I feel like I'm just like I'm just kind of scratching the surface. But yeah, that's a good idea. I should look into maybe putting something together for classic science fiction. Okay. Imperator, thanks for remembering a class director. Keep up the good work. Thank you. I try. I'm just glad you guys were around. I didn't know if anybody was going to be around this time of night. Um, Video Store says another overlooked aspect of Freakitt's work is a scope of location. Almost every region of America is represented in his work, and just how much of each film captured a sense of place. Yes, absolutely. Yes, I guess we're all kind of tempted to think of him as one of the definitive New York filmmakers, but he didn't make all of his films in New York, and he did make one of the definitive LA films. So very few people can make that transition to begin with. But then you look at he did Rules of Engagement, and he did the 12 Angry Men remake. Those are courtroom drama again. Okay, I think I'm back. I don't know why it does those dropouts. I was just gonna say, The Hunted is basically a wilderness film, so he did vary himself, and then like Bug is a very self-contained film, and Killer Joe has a particular atmosphere to it that he hadn't done before. So yeah, that's a good idea, sort of a cross cut of different sections of the American countryside, if you will. Do you like the classic Star Trek films? I do like the original cast films. I don't. with all the Star Trek films, well, with the TOS and TNG films, I kind of look at them separate from the series they're based on because I don't think any Star Trek film has ever quite gotten the spirit of the show it's based on, if that makes sense. So I kind of like looking at them as a sort of separate thing, even though it is technically the same characters. I do like all six of the TOS films. I don't really like any of the TNG films, if I'm honest. There's some good stuff in the first three. I guess Insurrection is the one I actually like most, but it's kind of that film's kind of more like a original series film. But and First Contact is solid, but I never thought the TNG films got the tone of what the Next Generation show was and what I love so much in it. And at least with the TOS films, I think they can all stand on their own pretty well. But if I had to choose one, it's motion picture all day long. I think the motion picture is actually the best Star Trek film. It's the one with the most scale and the most scope and actually the most gravitas. And even though the interiors and the costumes and even some of or really the tone of the film seems kind of devoid of humanity in some ways because it's so cold, and it's kind of Robert Wise and a crazy production, also kind of following 2001. It's the one that feels most like, okay, this is a movie experience, if that makes sense. So yes, I know Wrath of Khan is more energetic, and I really love Nicholas Meyer, and I think Wrath of Khan is great, and I love Voyage Home, and I love Undiscovered Country. I even like Star Trek Five. I like and enjoy all six of the TOS films. For me, motion picture in its original theatrical release version is actually the one I think is the best. And I know that's a very minority opinion, but that's my own take on it. And that's just if I have to sit down and watch any of the Trek films, I actually go back to motion picture most. Even though I know most people call it motionless picture and it's kind of recycling old ideas, I think the whole production of it is fascinating because it's an insane production. And if you've never studied the production of the first Star Trek feature, you should, because you're going to learn a lot about not just Hollywood, the collapse of the new Hollywood and the birth of the corporatized studios of the 80s, but you also learn a lot about modern filmmaking because the seeds of all of this stuff go all the way back into the 70s and on the bigger features like Star Trek the Motion Picture. Are you gonna watch a Freakin' film tonight? I'm gonna try to. I didn't know how long I was gonna go on this, and it's getting kind of later. But yeah, I am definitely doing um, the not to be morbid career retrospective. I think we all do, and trying to chip away at a few other physical media releases I just haven't gotten yet. Uh, Jason talking about speaking of cop movies and Mission Impossible. Have you heard about the forthcoming John Woo film? American action film with no spoken dialogue. I knew he was working on something, but I hadn't heard the specific details. So to be honest, anyone making a dialogue free film, if it had to be anyone, well, there's the perfect guy to do it. If anybody could pull off an action film without dialogue, it is the master of action films in the modern age, John Woo. And I still hope someday that his Hong Kong masterpieces will actually get definitive home video releases and be properly respected as the greatest modern action films ever made. And I just hate how he came to the US and his style kind of got looked at as cartoonish and pushed in different ways and kind of got laughed at. And I always have to go, have you people not seen Hard Boiled? You got to go back to the pre-US stuff. You got to see A Better Tomorrow. You got to see The Killer. You got to see Bullet in the Head, and you got to see Hard Boiled. You have to know where he really came from. So that would definitely be something. I would just hope that they would lay off of CGI and try to do it as practical as practical as humanly possible. Austin talking about the final scene in Live and Die in LA where it feels like a horror scene. Yeah. You get that in Friedkin's films. He didn't leave horror behind, and that's some of that extra spice that trickles in. Even the opening of To Live and Die in L.A. with the attempted assassination attempt, when particularly the moment when Chance realizes something's going on, Friedkin cuts to handheld camera work, and it ramps up the something is wrong here, and then he starts pushing the color red, reflecting on the faces in the close-ups, and there's a sort of eeriness, and the fact that their location and then they're outside, it almost has a sort of echo of the opening of the Parallax View, which is all about eeriness and weirdness and surreal qualities. um so yeah, you get the horror flashes throughout. And like I said before, cruising has tons of those. Every time when you see the killer in profile in the actual stabbing sequences, I mean, they are, yes, they're graphic to a degree, but it's not what you're actually seeing. It's the tension, and they're straight. Those are horror scenes. They just are. And nobody calls Cruising a horror film, but it has so many elements of a horror film and so much of the feel of it. And that's the palpable tension and the atmosphere that he could generate. And he would do this in all of his other films. So yeah, you make a great horror film. You don't just leave that behind, and you see that pop up all throughout his filmography. Oh, Caveman asks, can you recommend a laserdisc player with a top and bottom laser reader that doesn't cost as much as a trip to space? Yeah, it's gotten nuts just trying to find a good model player that doesn't cost an arm and a leg. By a dual laser, I guess you mean a one that'll do dual side play, so it'll just play both sides of the same disc. It's actually a lot more detailed to get into, because when you get into Laserdisc, the video output is very player dependent, so you have to get used to some quirks and things. There are a lot of models that are more popular that people like to go for, but unfortunately, that's kind of inflated the price a bit. And the other thing is, if you want AC3 capability, you have to get one with AC3 out, or you have to get one that you can mod on your own. Um, my favorite and what I use is the Panasonic LX900. That's like the sleeper player. They're a lot harder to find, but they usually don't cost as much, and it's got probably the best video output you can do without getting into the super top tier models and the things that people really chase after. You can mod it for AC3. I've got one that's AC3 modded, but it's got beautiful picture quality, but it's also got some issues. The first models had a video issues. So you have to get a later model, and then also it unfortunately removes a little sliver of one side of the picture. So it's not perfect. There's not really a perfect laserdisc player unless you get to the unobtainium top tier Japanese ones, like the legendary XO player. So basically, best advice: get the best player you can afford that actually works. Pioneer is usually the go-to standard for brands, but also try to do a little digging. You want to at least get one that has good video quality output, and make sure it does digital sound, because digital sound is, I think the biggest benefit of having a laserdisc player. So I'd say, any solid Pioneer, like the CLD D700 series. That's what I started with. The 703 and 704 is usually the one that people try to get. That's a little pricey, but that's a good solid place to start. Any good Pioneer from the early to mid 90s is about as good as you can do overall. Uh, Alternate universe for Mission Impossible got a film series back in the day. Yeah. You would think that they would have thought, hey, we have this property, and now it's folded into Paramount, but it just didn't have the I guess it didn't have as rabid of a Trek fan base, of course, but they could have definitely turned it into a film series, and a more suspense driven one back in the day. Is David Lean in your top 5 directors of all time? Oh, it's so hard to do ranking lists. I have I mean, I have my favorites, but I have my sort of okay. These are all the people in the pantheon, and they're in the pantheon, so they're just this is the hall of fame. These are the masters. These are the great ones that I revere, and to try and rank everybody is practically impossible. But if I had to do a top five, David Lean would definitely be up there somewhere. But I just find it so difficult to try and rank numbers. I can just make the distinction of okay, here are the really great directors, here are the amazingly great directors, and then here is the pantheon legend directors, the ones that we are not worthy. That's my sort of distinction. Oh yes, Deep Space Nine is great. I'm a bit of a late Trek person. I started a couple years ago, and I've been working my way through slowly. So I'm about three-quarters of the way through DS9 right now, and now all of the talk about underappreciated gem, and it makes so much sense now. So yeah, to be honest, I'm kind of glad they didn't have a film actually seeing how the TNG films turned out. It would have been nice had they gotten a big feature film because they certainly deserved it. But Star Trek has had incredible trouble translating from being tightly wound scripted television shows and overarching seasons into a narrative feature 2-hour screenplay. And I don't think anybody's ever quite nailed it with Star Trek. It's very difficult with any show. So because I've thought about it before, I don't even know what sort of story I would take just in my head thinking how would I do a Star Trek film? It's not an easy thing to sort of pigeonhole one way or another. But yeah, it's definitely an incredible series. Killer's an all-time masterpiece. Yes, 1000%. Yes, one of the great film endings. Period. Oh gosh, it wrecked me the first time I ever saw it. Still does. Just the layers, the levels, uh, every single aspect of that ending, and what it does for every single major character of the film, and just thinking about the aftermath of what happens after the credits roll is just absolutely incredible. Oh gosh, I did see The Guardian. I have some memories of it, but it has been so long that it's definitely one of the ones I have to go back and look at with fresh eyes. Um, oh, Eric's favorite comment about The Guardian was Ebert's observation is the first horror movie where a chainsaw was used against a tree. I wish I could ever come up with one zinger on the level of one of Ebert's beautiful comments. Yeah, bullet in the head. Oh gosh, bullet in the head. Oh man, talk about a film that needs a proper transfer and has the multiple different endings that are good in their own ways. And oh gosh, all the Wu films are so cursed on home video. It's so sad. He did a Reddit AMA not too long ago, and somebody asked him about it, and he's like, "I know it kills me. I don't know what I can't. They won't let me do anything." And it's like, if John Woo can't save his own films, what hope do we have? Oh, oh, fans of something made it in. Awesome. Hello there. We're actually going to be doing a live chat tomorrow. I'm going to do a post about it on the channel. So this won't be your only live experience of me this week if you can get enough of my babbles. Oh, okay. Let's see. Think I'm mostly caught up. Let me get the last couple of these. Favorite Bond film is like asking me what my favorite my favorite mode of breathing. It's so difficult. It's like they're so intrinsically part of me, and I love them all dearly. And uh, eh, it's hard. Um, Well, I mean, it's also kind of easy in a way because Live and Let Die is my entry point into cinema. the film that got me into films. That's not just the film that got me into Bond. That is the film that introduced me to practically everything, and is the film I have seen more times than any other film ever made, and is my favorite film of all time. So that is technically my favorite Bond film, because it's actually my favorite film ever. So it's a question I can easily answer, but it's also very difficult to answer. It's the same thing when people say, "Oh, you ever done a James Bond film ranking?" And I'm like, "How do you choose which finger you prefer?" They're all so important. Oh man, but yeah, it's still it's a fun struggle trying to do one of those. Top three directors: Murnau, Misaguchi, and Kurosawa for Joe Blow. That's a wonderful trio right there. Uh, I should I should put together my pantheon list of directors. Yeah, I probably need to write all of them down, and then of course I'll forget a few, and then I'll agonize over it, and then I'll probably throw some people because I don't revere some of the same people a lot of other people do, but that's what makes the conversation fun. And then I have the sort of dark horses or ones I champion because I'm like, they were great, darn it. I know they only made B films, but and nobody knows who they are anymore, but they were really great, I swear. Um, I, I haven't seen Oppenheimer yet because I was like, if I'm gonna through this, I'm gonna go see it in an IMAX theater with the 1570 print. And every time I go and look at it, all the shows are sold out, or it's got the nosebleed seats, and I'm already not a fan of IMAX theater design anyway. So I'm like, yeah. So I've tried to wait a little longer to let some of the hype die down, but I'm gonna go and try and see it, and just because there's an actual print, and see it before it's gone, just to see it for the technical aspects, and hopefully not have to have a nosebleed seat in an IMAX theater for 3 hours. Okay, let's see. Austin saw Dead Reckoning. Awesome. Yeah, it still throws me though because people say Dead Reckoning, and I don't think of Mission Impossible 7. I of course think of the super underrated Bogart Dead Reckoning with Elizabeth Scott that is on the wonderful Mustone Indicator Bogart Columbia Noir set, because that's where my head's at. If somebody says Dead Reckoning, I'm like, oh yes, that's the really underrated Bogart film with the absolutely beautiful small part that Wallace Ford has, is essentially as a sort of Bogart's arms supplier in a way, with smuggled in World War II surplus things stolen by his GI son. So if you haven't seen that, it's a phenomenal film. Ooh, Chris representing Man with the Golden Gun is his favorite underrated Bond film. Yes, anyone who's heard my commentary track praising the genius of the Man with the Golden Gun will understand that I have such an incredible fondness for that film, and I especially stick up for the films considered the black sheep of the series, because they're all important and so incredibly undervalued. Even if for most people they don't quite work, well, I still think they're masterpieces, and I did entire commentary tracks because I think so. Joshua talking about yeah, Last Hurrah for Chivalry getting the Criterion edition. Yeah, I wanted to pick that up, but it's very light on extras, unfortunately. I wish it had had some real extras for it. Yeah, Hardboiled did get a newer scan. There's a Japanese Blu-ray that's at least a little better, but it doesn't have the original audio. And A Better Tomorrow got the 4K scan, but terrible color grading, and also doesn't have original audio and hasn't been released over here. And it's still kind of unknown about the elements and all the rights. It's like a big just ball of red tape that's gonna have to be gone through. Well, I was doing a William Friedkin stream, and I did not expect to get asked for JW Pepper quotes. Wow, that's I guess I brought it on myself. I don't know, what should I go with? Hmm. By the power invested in me by the Louisiana Parish, I do by here. Wait, no, I do hereby commandeer this vehicle and all occupants within. And that means you, smart ass. Is that good enough? I, I haven't done that in so long. I guess I should brush up on my JW Pepperisms. But at least I remembered to do the spit. That's the most important part. You gotta time your spitting. Yeah, I'm not big on reserved theater seating. I like to just actually get there early and get my dead center, but a couple rows back to because I go into a theater, even a modern theater where I know the sound isn't very good, and I try to get proper seating for actual best sound placement because I'm that guy. So my list is basically everything is better than the Craig era films. You know me so well because that is true. Yes, I that yes, that is my list in a nutshell. Oh yeah, I will sit through both Jess Franco Fu Manchu films a dozen times gladly before I ever even acknowledge the Craig films ever again. And that says a lot if you've seen the two Jess Franco directed Harry Allen Towers final Fu Manchu film starring Christopher Lee, because Blood of Fu Manchu is one of the worst films I've ever sat through, and Castle of Fu Manchu is insane, but yeah, they're better than the Craig era. I know it's not much praise, but yeah, that's right. That's my headspace. Yeah, I've been trying to do some more live stuff, and I know this was news that just broke today, and I wanted to do something, and again I didn't have apologies, I didn't have anything prepared, and of course nobody does, so this is more just general film discussion and sort of reacting to the news, but I thought it was important, and unfortunately I've now done a number of live streams when people have passed away, so again, not to be morbid, but it's like, well, this is my own, I guess, little contribution to the sort of remembrance or whatever you want to call it, in my own small YouTube channel sort of way. So I hope that everybody's gotten at least something out of this. It's nice to have a chat with a bunch of people. I'm glad you guys were around on a Monday evening. I thought I would just hang out for an hour or so, but of course, me being me and talking about films, I can't do an hour or less. You guys know, you've seen my videos. Especially love when I forget I introduce some and say, "Oh, this will just be a short video," and short for me is 45 minutes to an hour, and I'm like, "Well, yeah, that is short for me." Somebody mentions a film, and I must go, "Yes, let's have a discourse." Can we get a Connery quote? Oh, I guess I'm doing requests. Any requests? I fall into it all the time. For some reason, there are certain ones I do. I don't know why, and I do them a lot. It just comes out unprovoked. For some reason, I do a bit from Never Say Never Again all the time, and I have no idea why. It just, you should fall to the reef. It's fine enough. Um. Oh shoot, I messed that up. Sorry. It's what happens when I get put on the spot. It's actually oh shoot. It's the exchange before that, actually. That was the second part. So it's your mom is well equipped. Thank you, Gems. So are you. You should fall to the reef. It's fine enough. I don't know why I do that a lot. I'll just literally be walking around, or like just it happens, like ridiculous contraption actually seems to work, Q. Nonsense, made one of these for the kids last Christmas. And that's of course the phone voice box from Diamonds Are Forever, when of course John having the infamous white shirt and short pink tie that we all like to gripe about. Okay, Horizon saw Oppenheimer. Okay, cool. Lots of okay, the sound very impressive. Okay. I'm hoping that Nolan has maybe reversed some of his sound opinions, because I think some of his previous films are some of the worst mixed films ever. Because I don't know what his theories may be about film sound mixing, but I know when I ran Inception at home, I thought I had blown a speaker coil or something, and I had to check everything over and over, and then remember, oh wait, I'm running Inception. It's a Nolan film. That's what it is. No, I haven't seen any of the Halloween UHDs. I've been sort of jumping into various catalog titles since I got up and running with 4K in the UHD format, and then I've been going through various box sets. So I'm going through the Arrow Bruce Lee set right now, and there's so much there and so much extra material that's it's gonna take a long while to finish and get through everything. So yeah, it's going to be another of my my longer reviews. Yeah, I am excited to check out the Kino Blu-ray release for the Mr. Wong films. I'm just sad they couldn't get the last film with Key Luke in there, because that's one of the few times that Key Luke actually got to play the lead role in a film. And I hope people actually check out more of those films actually, now that some of them are actually getting, actual proper releases. Oh, talking about The Hunted. Yeah, it's been a while since I've seen it. I just have the DVD. I showed some of my physical media releases earlier. Yeah, this is pretty darn good from what I remember, and it cuts several levels above the sort of generic film it was sold as, because you have the wonderful lead pairing of the cast, but you've also got Friedkin behind the camera. So I am definitely going to be revisiting this, because I remember liking it, and I just picked it up on DVD. It just I haven't really seen it in a good number of years. Sean Connery Japanese needs to be its own thing. Yeah. There's actually an extra line in the Only Live Twice trailer, when he turns off the lights after, and Aki has the line. The tiger says you must now do everything Japanese style. Everything good for tiger. But if you actually look at one of the trailers, there's an extra line, because he turns the light out and they go to have fun, and there's an extra line. I don't know if it was just dubbed in for the trailer, but it just literally says "even better on the dock." And now I can't see that scene without hearing that in my head. I think it was just done for the trailer as a gag, but yeah, that would be a fun thing. And admittedly, I don't know if you guys saw my, because I couldn't post it to YouTube, unfortunately. But a while ago, I lost my mind and did a silly Connery redub of various GoldenEye scenes, and I have been playing around with a sort of follow up with Live Twice, and trying to play around with some various scenes and things. It's a shame you can't put that stuff on YouTube, because then you got copyright bots and different things, and copyright strikes, which I understand, but it's also doing silly stuff with various scenes and not trying to make money off of it or anything. But yeah, since I couldn't post it on YouTube and I was playing around with stuff, I kind of went off the deep end, and I didn't just redub scenes. I actually remixed it. So I went to the stems and I replaced the entire dialogue track. And yeah, that was nuts. So I actually have been playing with doing a follow up, just because sometimes I have to be really goofy. I have to get it out somehow, and doing silly Bond dubs was something I decided to play around with. I don't know. I guess we all did weird, random, crazy things during the pandemic and lockdown, and that's just one of the weird things I did. Um, okay, seeing Oppenheimer in 1570. Yeah, I'm definitely going to check it out before the run ends, simply because that's the only opportunity, and I do have a theater near me. I just didn't want to get stuck with a bad seat. I've been meaning to get the Arrow Django UHD. I was originally going to get the Blu-ray, but now that I can, I'm definitely going to pick up the UHD, because I've been very curious to see what that new transfer looks like. And then, of course, it didn't help that they had to keep pulling it off the market, because I guess it was it Blue Underground who kept saying no, we still have rights, and there was that big sort of back and forth for a while. So that kind of made me sort of forget about it for a little bit because it was sort of in and out of release. Didn't mean to being up to something that requires 100 videos. Oh gosh, I have so many Bond videos I would like to do. I have so many videos I would like to do. The trouble is just finding the time. And I was originally just trying to think of how, just putting together a short video on Friedkin's passing and just talking about some of his films. But I'm glad I decided to go for a stream instead. Connery quotes and entrapment. I don't know. I guess when I was a kid, that might have been part of where my doing Connery voice all the time started. For some reason, I have two sisters, and we all saw Entrapment together, and for some reason, everybody always remembers the training scene where Catherine Zeta-Jones is having to crawl under the strings to simulate lasers, and I just thought it was such a weirdly funny kind of idea. So I just could imagine how, if that scene was really long and Connery was just like, "You've got to crawl under the lasers, Catherine. Damn it, we're on take 27. I'm tired of doing this. I'll just do it myself." I don't know why these silly things occur to me sometimes. Yeah, Kino announcing that they're doing a new transfer and release of Sea of Love is just another of their they're doing it. There's a new master. Sea of Love is going to have a new release. That's just kind of out of nowhere. I have that film on Laserdisc actually. I haven't seen it in a long time, and I never thought that would get a new master. So, I mean, great for any catalog title, but it's just another one of those kind of head scratchers of uh, who moved this up in the pipeline. Oh, cool. Elvin got the French Connection signature Blu-ray. Awesome. Yeah, I'm glad I'm at least glad some of the panic buying has died down and that some copies are starting to get more in circulation. I just hope everybody is able to get a copy of it because that is the best version of the film and has the original mono, and that is the version to have in your collection. So everybody here, if you haven't gotten the signature Blu-ray, definitely try and find it sooner rather than later. But just hopefully you're able to get it at for $10 or so, like it should be, instead of the crazy prices it shot up to. Yeah. Oh, that never gets old. I can only blame myself. I should have mailed it to the Marx Brothers. I use that all the time. Or our situation has not improved. Or like this is intolerable. Uh, these things just apply to everyday life, unfortunately, I can't ask people if they ever picked their feet in Poughkeepsie without getting very, very strange looks because nobody gets that anymore, unfortunately. But maybe one day I'll encounter somebody in the real world of sadly not enough cinephiles who might actually get that. I don't know if I could throw around "To Live and Die in LA" quotes and people would get it. Ooh, Christopher asking about know anything about the supposed John Glenn and Timothy Dalton beef, or in regards to the Columbus movie. Um, there's not really anything out there except there's like a little tiny report or mention every once in a while in like only the barest terms that on License to Kill that Dalton was kind of feeling like John Glenn was not really a actor's director, and I think John Glenn would probably say the same thing about himself, and that was something that even Richard Maybaum had sort of pointed out during the making of the '80s films, but that I don't really know how it played out because there's so little information, but it does seem that Dalton was kind of looking for more character investment, like what he always does. Um, so I can understand that because they were coming kind of coming from different perspectives, and I'm sure his third film probably would have been with a different director because by that point Glenn had done all five '80s films. Um, and the whole production of the Columbus film he did was kind of messy to begin with, and he talks a bit about that in his book. So I think there might have been an attempt to maybe get Dalton in the cast of that film at some point. I can't remember if that was a thing they were trying for or not. I'm sure they may have tried to, but that was a whole messy situation to even get that film off the ground, let alone made. So I know probably a lot of people sort of dropped in and out. But the only thing I've ever heard with about there maybe being a potential beef was on License to Kill towards the end of the shoot, that they maybe had a sort of disagreement, but I don't think it was like a giant massive thing. But again, there's just not a whole lot of info out there. Oh gosh, if you post more JW quotes, I can't help myself. Toby, Toby, I got me a regular Ben Hur down here doing 95 minimum. Need any help, JW? Hell no. Sorry. Uh, yeah, Henry Cavill was the other sort of one of the other, well, really the other front runner for being cast as Bond, but now that ship has kind of sailed, and I don't know what they're doing, and I don't know what sort of hand Amazon is going to play since their buyout. So everything is up in the air. It would make sense for them to go with a pre-established name and not to have to start from scratch, but that's not the direction they like to do. They like to just pull the plug, and you I have no clue where they're going. Off topic and perhaps separate video thoughts on Disney pulling out of Australia for physical media. Yeah, that's it's a hard thing to get a real read on, because all studios and releasing entities usually treat foreign markets a bit differently than the way they treat the US, and then they treat each foreign market a bit differently, but there's never that same sort of 100% we support and put out everything in all territories. So and Disney kind of seems all over the place, because they're doing that. And then they signed a deal with Mill Creek here. So that is just, that makes zero sense. So I have no clue what their whole designs or plans might be. I don't even really think they have plans. Oh gosh, getting the Bond films on UHD is that's my big thing. And it's like, if they come out, there you have to deal with Amazon. The 4K masters have been done for years now. I'm afraid they weren't done in HDR. I'm afraid they may be SDR. We have the versions that went on streaming for a little bit that are floating around. Those seem to be based on the 4K masters. So it's up in the air. But when they do happen, definitely expect me to go off the deep end of analysis. And I'm sure the audio is still going to be a major problem, as all the Bond releases have big audio problems for the first 16 films. And I just hope they actually happen, because I'm afraid that they're going to get somehow locked up in Amazon and they're not going to want to release them, which there's no way of knowing. Oh, Dalton versus Moore. Oh, no. You guys are going with the hardest questions. Ugh. Oh, that's like saying, do you prefer left or right? Do you prefer day or night? It's like they are both essential. Caught a showing of Oppenheimer in 70 millimeter IMAX. Had a good time, but thought my head was going to explode Belloc style from the low drone vibrations. Yeah. They really overdo it with that, and I still don't understand why IMAX is a 5.0 sound channel system. That makes no sense to me. I'm not really a fan of how they mix films for that. Cavill would have been better than Craig, to be honest. Yes. Um, just yes. Um, then again, I think even any inanimate object would have been a better choice given the approach that he took and insisted on. But that's just my own opinion. I think even I could have done a better job, or again, any inanimate object. But that's just me. Yes, I am very excited for the Todd Browning Criterion box set. I thought they were just going to do Freaks, but the fact that we're getting 3 Todd Browning films plus the new restoration of The Unknown, I'm like, take my money now. Take it now. So that's really exciting. Doo, 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 doo. With your recent Phantom book reviews, some content about the movie would be great. Better than the movie itself. Hey, I will no, that film gets a bad rap. Is it perfect? No. But, you know, it's a serial film made in 1996 by the primary writer of Last Crusade. I mean, there's so much good stuff in there. And it's amazing we even got it, and it is supremely underappreciated. Yes, I am definitely doing something on the film, and I've been finally able to get my hands on more Phantom materials. So that's why I'm like, well, I'm going to put more of my Phantom love on my YouTube channel, because the Phantom is so underrepresented in the US, and it's so hard getting some of the other stories, and especially, all of the international stories that were never put out here, that I'm like, well, I don't care if I'm the only channel doing Phantom stories besides, or Phantom videos besides the Phantom fan groups, but doggone it, I'm going to do it because the Ghost Who Walks is forever and amazing. Amazon with Bond. Jeff Bezos is Blofeld. Yeah. It'd be a better Blofeld than what they came up with, wouldn't it? Sorry, couldn't resist. Oh gosh, yes, Christopher. I sincerely hope someday Dalton decides to do audio commentaries. He would be incredible at it, and just to hear his insight and be off the cuff, and just because the man put in so much work and had such conviction, and you get it in every frame of those 2 films. And just when you hear him talking about the character, when he's really talking about it, and he's not having to get the same questions asked over and over again, I mean, the man exudes the commitment and the care. Just, oh gosh, it just comes out of him. And if there's anybody I could get to actually sit down and me literally record the commentary itself, like I would actually just do it myself, that is the one. Because the ones Roger did are treasures. They are treasures. So I would love, it'd be great to get George to do a track. I think he'd be game for it. We kind of got one with Pierce doing the GoldenEye Zoom thing, and he did most of One for Die Another Day. And I know he's not a fan of the format. I know it's a very nerve wracking thing to do. I've done them myself. I get that, but it'd be great if I could get him to talk about his films, and do some more with that. But Dalton is the one I want to get most actually. Okay, let's see. Let me get these last couple so that way I can make sure. And I think I've covered everything in the chat. I always like to try and make sure and get everything before I end. I try to get as much as I can, because I know it sucks when your comment doesn't get noticed. But in all of these streams, even when I have a topic, we always have a way of getting onto other things. So I think that's any part of any good stream. So let's see. Casino Royale and Skyfall were the only really good Craig films. No Time to Die was enjoyable, but the plot was horrid. Yeah, even though I don't like them, the first and third of his are the most solid, and they should have stopped after the third, because after that they lost everybody's goodwill, and they had made an exit point for themselves. And when you watch all of them in order, it seems very obvious that was the sort of, okay, now we're going to stop here and move on. But apparently other people decided they had other ideas and they wanted to keep going, but they didn't have any plans, and then we got to more increasingly terrible films. Okay, Chris is more of a Roger fan, because of humor and being suave and things. That's understandable. There's different flavors for everybody. I just hate how Roger gets pigeonholed a certain way, and people don't look at how intensive his performances can get and how nuanced they are and how they really play in the moment, and it's not just lightness for lightness sake, and it's not him just playing another version of Simon Templar. I think that is an extremely unfair remark because those are two completely different performances, but they have some natural connection because the Saint is a gigantic chunk of Bond's DNA. I mean, it just is. You cannot escape that. I mean, the Saint is one of the primary influences on Bond, if not the primary character influence. Yeah, I don't. It's hard to even think of a modern Bond actor. I think the missed opportunity is Jason Isaacs. That's the person I'd go to right now and literally just say, "Age be damned, I don't care. You're perfect. Let's go do this right now." That's my Bond 26 right there. That's who I'd go to. That's so again, age be damned because he's perfect. So I've felt that way since the 90s. So I think he is the one who got away for sure. But outside of that, I'm kind of back at the drawing board trying to figure out somebody. Oh, no, no, don't worry. My entire head, it reverts back to Bond regardless of what I'm talking about. Everything in the world connects back to Bond for me because that's the way my brain is wired. So all my streams become Bond streams because that's me. So no worries. um yeah, the easiest way to put it is yes, I'm anti Craig era, just wholeheartedly. I do recognize there are good elements in some of the films, and Martin Campbell put the energy into Casino Royale 2006, which is what people responded to. And then he wasn't around anymore to sort of put that there and to push back against Ian wanting to do things and other people wanting to do things. And I think that's why so many people gravitate towards the 2006 film is because you had Martin Campbell there to be that other voice in the room. And I think Skyfall should have been the end of this era because that's the clear point they set, and they literally put an ending there, and it felt relatively solid, even though I think that film is a mess. Um, yeah, and then they just got progressively worse. So yeah, they're. I just don't like any of the direction they went in, and I admit I'm a Bond purist, but I also think Moonraker is a masterpiece. I can defend any of the original films. I love all of the original films. Um, so it's not just I only like one particular aspect. No, I love the entire original series, but I feel the Craig era is its own thing and doesn't really have anything to do with the actual character or the film's legacy. But that's just how I've felt ever since Casino Royale came out, and I've sat in a theater and felt like I died inside. But then it happened four more times. But that's just how it is to me. I know not everyone agrees, but that's I totally am fine with people liking elements of them, but I just they're hard for me to get through. So, but I admit it. Oh, the Bond games have been so not properly supported. Yeah, I'm hoping the new game actually turns out well, but it's just like indie games. We have not had a proper indie game that is great through and through. I mean, the only one we have is Fate of Atlantis. I've been replaying some of the others and thought about maybe making some videos, and they're even with the good elements, they're messy and they've never been properly supported, just like Bond games. Yeah, the From Russia with Love game had great elements, and I was so excited when it came out. And it's basically like Everything or Nothing Part Two. It's weird, like you say, it's weird grafting a modern action plot line onto the classic film and sort of jumping back and forth. And you want to talk about me doing Connery quotes? I quote older Connery voicing in a video game from that all the time. Just oh gosh, I can't help it. It was like, um, how do I get to the roof? You'll need this pass key. It's difficult, but not insurmountable. I'll drive. Because the delivery is so weird because he's not used to doing video game voiceover and it's a new thing and he's much older and they're doing the 60s imagery. So you have that weird disconnect. Like, I think it's just beginning. So anyway, I even quote the game. I can't help it. Yeah, Lego Indie one is good. I know the second one is not supposed to be very good. I've just never played it. Um, Oh, good. Yes, somebody else who, like me, prefers the 1967 Casino Royale. Yes. It's nice to actually hear other people besides me actually love that cinematic insanity and are on its weird wavelength. Sometimes I feel like it's just me. Um, I've seen some of the Lazenby Hong Kong films. I haven't seen all of them. I really should. Still a shame he never did get to make the film with Bruce Lee because I think it just would have been so fun seeing them on screen together. Let's see. Yeah, to bring it all back to the main subject to close out. It's still just really incredibly sad news. To that Friedkin has passed away. I just really hope that this encourages people to dig further into his filmography and the whole new American Hollywood period of of the 70s and realize that all of these guys, they had such incredible careers that were, they went into other areas. And while Friedkin is one of the ones who survived that, his career never hit that same A level of height, but it didn't mean that he wasn't still plugging away and still trying to make interesting films and also having battles with studios and edits and things. So he was a phenomenally interesting character. Not always the easiest person to work with, and not somebody that us as cinephiles and physical media collectors always agreed with some of the decisions he made on presenting his own films on home video. But somebody you certainly could always and should always respect. So I just really hope this encourages people to realize that he made more films other than The Exorcist. Yes, The Exorcist is still great, but he made other films. So that's the main point I wanted to get across and doing this and just talking about his films in general and what they've meant to me over the years and having this wonderful dialogue with you guys here on the wonderfulness of YouTube. So I hope this has been, at least a fun little informal chat under not the happiest of circumstances. Again, this is my own little sort of contribution to a remembrance, if you will. And I will, like all of us, be spinning all the Friedkin titles I have in my collection and looking at the new UHD of To Live and Die in LA, and also trying to chip away at some of the films I haven't seen or haven't seen in a long time, and pick up some other releases and just do the whole sort of self retrospective that we put ourselves on. And I encourage everybody else to do it if I'm sure we're all going to be doing the same thing anyway. We've already started, and we're all here talking about Billy Friedkin in the live stream form. So thanks for hanging out, everybody. That it's now. Wow, I went later than I thought I would, but this was all unplanned, and I hope to do some more live streams in the near future and things. So I hope this has been fun and encourage everybody to just look at the incredible body of work that Friedkin left behind, and also do absolutely go and read his memoir, The Friedkin Connection. It's a fantastic read, and you won't be able to put it down, and you will also laugh quite a lot at some of the some of the craziness that he relates and the various anecdotes and things. So I'm actually looking forward to going and rereading that now. So thanks for hanging out, everybody. I'll hopefully I can start doing some more streams in the near future, and Thanks for hanging out, and definitely go and look at Friedkin films on physical media, and chip away at some that you just don't have in your collection yet, and hopefully you'll find a new gem or new film to obsess over, as you pretty much can do with pretty much all Friedkin films. So all right, I'm just gonna end it here, and thanks for hanging out, everybody, and have a better one.